I've always believed that if something feels wrong, it probably is. That gut feeling, the one that creeps in before your mind can put the pieces together, that's not superstition. That's survival. And I ignored it the night I pulled my Volkswagen van into the red dust silence of the Sedona Desert. It was just after sundown. The sky still held on to that lavender burn, the kind that makes the mesas glow like dying embers. I'd been driving since Flagstaff looking for a free BLM campsite just west of Cathedral Rock, away from the crowds and tourist buzz of uptown. Sedona has this kind of sacred reputation, spiritual, mystical. People come here to align their energies or whatever. Me, I just wanted space to think, to breathe, to forget some things I'd been carrying. I was traveling solo, like always, 34, divorced, recently laid off. My life had been in this slow, grinding tailspin, and the road was the only place that made any sense anymore. The van, my 87 Westphalia named Orla, was more home to me than any apartment ever was. It rattled like hell above 60, and the sink never drained right, but it kept me warm at night. It kept me moving. And sometimes, that's all you need. The road to the campsite was rough, narrow switchbacks, loose rock, total silence, no lights, no signs, just GPS coordinates from a free camping website and a couple grainy reviews. I liked it that way. If I could see another rig's taillights from my spot, I'd move. But this place was deserted. I parked just before a dry wash, under the wide spread of a juniper tree, the limbs low and crooked like something old trying to whisper. I cracked a beer and climbed up on the roof of the van, watching the stars muscle their way through the last of the daylight. There's nothing like a desert sky, so open, so uncaring. You start to feel like you're standing on a forgotten planet, like maybe no one knows you're here. That's when I saw the first light. I thought it was a star at first, bright, steady, but it was too low, just hovering, maybe 30 degrees above the horizon to the south. It didn't move, not like a plane or satellite would. Just stayed there, still, watching. I told myself it was a drone. Sedona was full of people with money and too much free time. Someone probably flew it up for a better view of the rocks. But then a second light blinked on, directly beside it, and then a third. Each one the same distance apart, forming a perfect triangle in the air. They didn't blink, didn't shift, just hovered. A dry knot twisted in my chest. I sat up straight, tried to rationalize. There had to be an explanation. Maybe they were some kind of military thing, but I hadn't seen anything about flight restrictions or testing zones. Nothing made sense. And then they started to move. Not fast, not chaotic, just slow, deliberate movement across the sky. The entire triangle rotated like it was pivoting on an axis. I felt this weird pressure in my ears, like altitude change, even though I hadn't moved. Like the air itself was reacting to whatever that thing was. And then, without warning, the lights vanished. Not faded. Not flew off. Just blinked out. Gone. As if they were never there. I sat on the roof for another hour, scanning the sky. Nothing. No sound. No movement. My ears were ringing. Eventually, I climbed down, told myself I was tired, that my brain was playing tricks on me. Desert air can do that. Mess with your senses. Still, I couldn't bring myself to turn the van lights off that night. I locked every door, pulled every curtain tight. That was the first night I didn't sleep. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of my campsite, half expecting to see scorch marks in the sand or something torn up. Nothing. The place was still. Eerily so. I didn't hear any birds, no wind. Just the soft crunch of my boots on the sand and the distant hiss of the sun burning through the sky. I thought about packing up, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe I didn't want to admit how unsettled I really was. I'd driven across the country solo, slept in Walmart parking lots, hiked through black bear territory. I wasn't going to be scared off by a few lights in the sky. But that day was off. I tried to go for a hike near Doe Mountain, maybe clear my head, but I couldn't focus. The red rocks didn't feel warm and grounding like they usually do. They felt cold, watched. Every time I stepped into the shade of a canyon wall, I felt this sudden drop in temperature, like walking into a freezer. I even checked my pulse at one point when I convinced I was getting sick or hallucinating. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt right. That night, I kept the windows open. I wanted to hear something, anything that might explain what I'd seen. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, not animal footsteps, not the scattered four-beat rhythm of a deer or the scratchy patter of a coyote. These were slow, measured, human. I froze in bed. My hand slid silently to the knife I kept in the crack between the cushions. The moonlight stretched across the back of the van, spilling through the top curtains in pale lines. I waited, breath locked in my throat. The steps moved around the passenger side. Crunch, crunch, then silence. I held my breath for what felt like an hour. Nothing. Then a faint whisper, so faint I thought I imagined it. Still watching. I sat bolt upright, knife clutched, sweat cold against my back. I tore open the curtain. Nothing. No one. Just empty desert, still and blank. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the finally broke over the ridge, the desert turned gold like nothing had happened. That's the thing about this place. It never carries the night into morning. It burns it away. Like whatever you saw, whatever you felt, didn't exist in daylight. But I knew what I'd heard. I didn't move for a long time, just sat there in the driver's seat with the door open, coffee gone cold in my hand, staring out across the red dirt flats. I'd circled the van twice, looking for prints, disturbances, anything, but there was nothing. No tracks, no sign anyone had been there. That made it worse. Because I knew the sound of human footsteps. I knew what I heard. You can't gaslight yourself forever. Eventually, your instincts get louder than your logic. I should have left right then. But I didn't. And I think a part of me needs to admit why. I was desperate to believe it wasn't real, that I wasn't unraveling, that I could still trust the ground beneath my tires and the silence between trees. You don't realize how much of yourself is built on the assumption that what you see is what's there, until it isn't. So I stayed. I told myself I'd leave by nightfall, just one more day. Maybe I'd talk to someone, find another camper, get a sense if anyone else had seen those lights. The nearest pull-off was about 3 miles east on a rough trail road. I'd seen it listed on the same free camping site. Some guy named Travis had posted a blurry photo of his fifth wheel next to a rock wall, said the stars were mind-blowing. Maybe he was still out there. I packed a small day bag, left a note in the van, just in case, and set out. It was late morning, already creeping past 90 degrees. The trail was faint, mostly game paths weaving through prickly pear and manzanita, winding toward the cliffs. About a mile in, I found something strange. A small clearing, maybe 15 feet across. At first glance, it looked like any other dry patch of desert, until I stepped into it. Dead silent, not quiet, silent, no insects, no birds, not even wind. My ears popped, just like they had when I saw those lights. That strange pressurized stillness. And the ground, God, the ground, it felt different. It gave underfoot like dry sponge. I crouched and touched the dirt. It was warm, warmer than the air. But when I looked closer, it wasn't quite dirt at all, more like a gray-black dust, almost metallic, like ash from a welding torch. I stood fast, backed out of the clearing. My stomach twisted. It felt wrong, deep, ancient wrong, like stepping onto something that had no business being here, a place the land itself wanted to forget. By the time I made it to the other campsite, I was sweating, dizzy, hands shaking in the heat. I half hoped Travis would be there just so I could talk to someone, break whatever mental loop I was caught in. But the spot was empty. No rig, no people, just tire tracks leading in and none leading out. I stood there for a long time. The wind picked up, rustling through the brittle shrubs and knocking a loose tin can against the fire ring someone had left behind. I stared at that fire ring, blackened but cold, like it hadn't been used in days. But if the tracks led in and not out, where was Travis? I turned to head back, and that's when I saw it. Another light, but this time it wasn't in the sky. It was just inside the tree line, low to the ground, flickering like a flame, but colder, paler, like moonlight caught in a glass jar. I froze, not out of fear this time, out of instinct. The kind of instinct that tells a deer when to run before it hears the twig snap. The light pulsed once, then again, then it moved, not floated, not flickered in the wind. It moved, deliberately, behind a juniper trunk. And when I stepped toward it, the light blinked out. I ran. I didn't care if I was being paranoid. I didn't care if I twisted my ankle on the rocky slope. I didn't stop until Orla was in sight, that faded green van shining like salvation in the afternoon sun. I jumped in, started the engine, and threw it into reverse. Dust roared behind me as I tore down the narrow trail, suspension creaking, windows rattling. I didn't stop until I hit pavement again, nearly 40 minutes later, just outside town. I parked at a gas station and just sat there for a while, shaking, trying to breathe. Eventually, I found enough calm to fill the tank and grab some supplies. The clerk looked at me strange, probably because I smelled like sweat and panic, but he didn't say anything, and that should have been the end of it. But when I got back to the van, something was sitting on the windshield. A rock, small, smooth, perfectly round, with a single burnt hole through the center. There was no way it was there when I pulled in. I looked around. No one was watching, no one even near. I picked it up, slowly. It was warm to the touch, not from the sun, from something else. And underneath it, carved faintly into the dust on the glass, was a word: stay. There are things that make your body react before your brain can catch up. A whisper behind your ear in an empty room, a shadow that doesn't line up with the light. But this was something else. I stood in the heat haze of that gas station lot, holding the stone in one hand, the word stay etched in dust like a threat or a plea. My first thought was that someone was messing with me, that maybe I'd stumbled onto private land out there. Maybe I crossed a boundary I didn't see. But then I looked at that rock again. It wasn't natural, not just the whole shape, smooth like river rock, sure, but there was no river anywhere near here. And the burn mark, it wasn't cracked or scorched on the outside. It was clean, surgical, like something passed through it without touching the rest. I dropped it, and I left. I didn't stop driving until I reached a paid campground on the outskirts of Cottonwood, a couple hours south. Somewhere with lights, with people, with noise, somewhere I could pretend I was still part of the world that made sense. I paid for 2 nights, found a spot tucked between a family in a massive fifth wheel and a retired couple with a pop-up trailer and a yappy dog. I wanted that noise, that safety. But even surrounded by normalcy, I couldn't shake it. That feeling like something had its eye on me. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I locked every door and window in the van. I left a flashlight by my head and the keys in the ignition, just in case. The campground was quiet after 10, but I heard every movement like it was inside with me. Every creak of settling gravel, every far-off cough or bark or branch snap. Around 2 a.m., I saw the lights again. Not above me this time. Not out in the desert. They were right there, just beyond the tree line at the edge of the campground. 3 of them, in a straight, slow-moving line. Low to the ground, barely visible between the trees. They moved almost like someone carrying lanterns, but too smooth, too in sync, and they didn't cast shadows, didn't brighten the branches. They just were, like holes burned into the world. I didn't go outside. I didn't blink. I just watched, frozen behind the windshield as they moved past my van and disappeared behind the bathroom building. No footsteps, no sound. Just this growing static in my chest, like my heart was trying to warn me of something my mind couldn't explain. The next morning, I asked around. The old man next to me, Don, I think, just laughed when I brought it up. Said Sedona always brought out the UFO crowd, especially around summer solstice. The woman at the front desk smiled politely and told me about a vortex tour I could book if I was into the spiritual stuff, but no one took me seriously, except for one. She was parked in a faded blue Class C with Arizona plates and window screens that looked handmade. Mid-40s, weathered tan, deep-set eyes. I didn't catch her name right away, but she listened. Really listened. When I finished, she asked just one question. Did they follow you? I didn't answer right away because it felt like a trap. Then she nodded to herself and said, You need to leave Sedona. Today. I asked her what she meant, who they were, what the lights were. She just shook her head. I don't think they're from anywhere we can point to on a map, she said, and I don't think they want you here. Then she handed me a small strip of woven cloth, looked like it came off a dream catcher, and told me to keep it on the dash. It won't stop them, she said, but it might confuse them. They don't like repetition. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to throw it back and pretend I hadn't just spent the last 2 nights doubting everything I thought was real. But I kept it, and I left. Not just the campground, not just Sedona. I started driving east toward Flagstaff, then dipped south toward Payson, then Globe. I kept moving 300 miles, then 4, then 5. And still I felt it. Not just the lights, the wrongness. The way shadows bent at the corner of my eyes. The moments where I'd look up and swear the road had changed. The strange warping of distance and direction, like I was being subtly steered off course. By the third night, I was camped in the mountains just outside Silver City, New Mexico. Remote, yes, but surrounded by pine this time. Cool air, not the open, cracked plateaus of Sedona. I thought I'd finally shaken it, but the air felt too still. And I noticed the sounds were off again, like the trees were holding their breath. I didn't light a fire, I didn't cook, I just sat in the van and waited. And right around 1 a.m., I felt it again. A pressure. Low, deep, like something humming just outside the range of hearing, but it wasn't aside me. My teeth ached, my joints vibrated, my thoughts slowed like thick syrup in my head, and then the lights, right outside the passenger window, 3 of them, hovering inches off the ground. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I watched, paralyzed, as they pulsed, faintly, like breathing. Then they drifted, around the van, once, twice. 3 times. I couldn't tell how long it lasted, but when they vanished, I felt something leave with them. Some part of me, some thread I didn't know was being pulled, and on the window where the middle light had hovered was a smudge handprint. Not human. Too long. Too thin. 4 fingers, and somehow it was burned into the glass. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even blink. I stared at that handprint until the sun came up, until the dew on the windshield pooled and ran down, and still the mark remained unblurred, untouched, like it had been etched into the glass by intention, by intelligence. I thought about washing it off, about wiping it away and pretending it had never been there, but I didn't. I couldn't. Something about it felt like a warning, not a message. Like a warning sign you don't dare erase, not because it protects you, but because it contains something on the other side. That morning, I drove into town, numb. I walked into a local hardware store in Silver City, bought a new windshield scraper, a bottle of ammonia, and a roll of duct tape. The cashier tried to make small talk. I couldn't respond. I was too busy wondering if anyone else could see it. The mark, the heat stain, the warping edge of reality I was trailing behind me like an oil leak, but they didn't react. No one looked twice. So maybe it was just me. That's when I started questioning if this thing was physical at all, or if it was something else, something psychological, something spiritual. Was it following me? Or was I pulling it along like a shadow I couldn't outrun? And then I remembered the woman's words at the campground. They don't like repetition. That night, I did something different. I didn't just camp. I hid. I pulled off a service road near the Gila National Forest, found a narrow turnoff that barely fit the van. No fire, no lights, no cooking. I parked backward, covered the windows, shut off all electronics, and I sat, still, listening, waiting. Trying not to repeat a single thing I had done the previous night. No snacks, no reading, not even the same hoodie. It felt insane, ritualistic, paranoid, and yet it was the first night I didn't see the lights. Not above, not around, just darkness, stillness, and silence so deep it rang in my ears. By dawn, I felt like I'd passed some kind of test, like I'd finally shaken them, or at least lost their interest. I told myself it was over, that whatever had chased me from Sedona had either grown bored or lost my trail. I even allowed myself a real breakfast the next morning: eggs, toast, black coffee. The usual, the normal. I let myself believe it was done, but it wasn't. Because on the second night in the forest, I broke my own rule. I repeated. Not much, just the music. I played the same album I'd listened to the morning of the lights, some ambient acoustic thing I like to drive to. I didn't even think about it. Until the air changed, just after 11 p.m., I felt it first in my spine. That cold flicker, like standing too close to a transformer. My hair rose, my breath caught, and then came the knock. 3 soft knocks. On the roof. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because the van was tall, I had no ladder, no roof rack, and no trees overhanging. There was no reason, no way anything should be up there. And yet, tap, tap, tap. Again. Slower this time. Measured. Then silence. I turned off the music. Sat in the dark, trying to hold my body still, while my mind sprinted in circles. My flashlight sat inches from me, but I didn't dare use it. I remembered what the woman said. Confusion, no patterns, nothing recognizable. I pulled off my hoodie, reversed it inside out, and put it back on. I moved the floor mat from left to right, rearranged the water bottles on the counter. Anything. Everything. Small acts of noise, mismatched movements, and the tapping stopped. But not because I'd scared it away, because something landed on the ground beside the van. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clumsy, it was deliberate and very, very close. The dry crunch of pine needles under something light but heavy enough to bend the grass. I heard it move once, twice, and then click. A sound like a camera shutter right by the back door. And then breathing. Not normal breathing, not from lungs. It sounded mechanical, warped, artificial, like someone trying to mimic the sound of breath without ever having done it themselves. I sat frozen, heart hammering against my ribs, the silence inside the van louder than the thing outside it. And then, click. Again. Like another photo, followed by something worse, a whisper. Not from one voice, but from 3, layered together, right outside my back window. You came to us. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, bones locked, blood pounding, eyes wide and wet, trying to convince myself I was asleep, that I was dreaming, that this was some exhaustion-induced hallucination, until the van shook. Not violently, not like an earthquake, more like someone running their fingers gently along the exterior, tracing the edges, caressing the steel. I grabbed the keys, turned the ignition. The lights outside flared. 3 of them, directly behind me. I didn't care. I threw the van in reverse, with tires screaming against gravel, skidding sideways as I launched backward onto the forest road. I spun the wheel, gunned it forward, didn't look in the mirrors, didn't care what I might hit. I just drove for hours, through the dark, through the silence, through the echo of that whisper still ringing in my ears. You came to us. Not a threat, not a warning. A statement, as if I had done this, as if I'd asked for it. By the time I stopped driving, the sun was rising behind me, soft and slow, like it was ashamed to light the path I had taken. I didn't know where I was, somewhere west of Lordsburg, maybe farther. I don't remember passing signs or towns, just shadows stretching across the road and the white streak of my own headlights in the dark. I pulled into an abandoned gas station lot with a collapsed canopy and a rusted-out soda machine half-eaten by desert sun. It looked like it hadn't seen a customer in 2 decades. Perfect. I parked behind the building, crawled into the back of the van, and passed out for hours without taking off my shoes. The adrenaline crash hit hard. When I woke up, it was dusk again, and I panicked, thinking I'd lost an entire day. I hadn't. But everything felt wrong. Time didn't move the same way anymore. My phone clock didn't match the dash. My GPS had reset. Even the position of the sun seemed tilted, like someone had rotated the horizon just enough to make my stomach churn. I tried to tell myself I was tired, delirious. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't just being followed. I was being tracked. I opened the van and looked for footprints. There were none. No tire marks but mine. No birds, no bugs, no wind, just stillness. That impossible, oppressive kind of stillness that doesn't occur in nature. The kind that feels designed. I was about to slam the door shut when I noticed something in the dirt just beneath my rear bumper. It looked like glass at first, then like quartz, then like nothing I could name. It was a small, translucent disc, perfectly circular, thin, cool to the touch. And when I picked it up, I felt a pressure behind my eyes, like a nosebleed that never came. My thoughts got sluggish, words dulled in my head. I dropped it immediately. And the moment it hit the dirt, it disappeared. I mean, gone. Not buried, not hidden, just gone. I stood there for a full minute, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, a mirage from exhaustion, but my headache lingered. Something had been there, something that wanted to be found, and I had touched it. That night I didn't hide, I didn't camp, I ran. I drove south through Deming toward the border, zigzagging roads at random. I stopped using GPS. I didn't answer texts. I stopped updating my social media. I didn't want a digital trail. I didn't want anything that could suggest routine, habit, or pattern, because they watched for patterns. That's what I kept remembering. What that woman said back in Sedona, that they're drawn to the familiar, to loops, to things done the same way over and over again. Ritual attracts them. Repetition is a signal, and I'd signaled too much. Music, routines, driving habits, the shape of my travels, I had made myself easy to find, but I didn't know how to undo it, how to stop being seen by whatever these things were. So I drove until I couldn't anymore, until I started to see lights that weren't headlights, that weren't stars. They weren't even in the sky. I started seeing them in reflections, in puddles, in mirrors, in the glass doors of roadside diners I never entered. One time, I even saw them blinking softly in the chrome of my bumper. 3 little orbs pulsing slow like a heartbeat, like breath. I didn't look directly at them. I couldn't. Something inside me knew not to. It was like my instincts had evolved in real time, like the rules of survival had changed and my gut hadn't caught up, but something older had. One night, somewhere in the Bootheel of New Mexico, I pulled off on a dirt road near a rocky ravine. The land looked scorched and twisted, like lightning had struck and never left. I thought it might be safe. It wasn't. Not because they found me, but because I found something else. It was half buried in the earth. A structure, just barely visible under layers of wind-blown sand and loose rock. I wouldn't have noticed it if my headlights hadn't caught the faint gleam of a metallic corner. I thought it might be an old bunker, maybe a mining outpost, maybe nothing at all. But when I got closer, I knew I'd made a mistake. The door wasn't metal. It was some kind of black composite, seamless, smooth, no hinges, no handles, and worse, no dust. Everything else around it was bone dry, covered in the kind of sand that clings to everything. But this, it was clean, untouched, not even wind-marked. That's when the ground beneath my feet started to hum. Faint at first, just a deep, low vibration, like a subwoofer under the soil. Then stronger, louder, closer. I backed away, but before I could reach the van, I saw it. Them. Again. 3 lights, floating in the ravine, not flying, not bobbing. Observing, they weren't high in the air anymore. They were close, on my level, watching me the way a biologist might observe a lab rat trying to escape a maze. I didn't run. I walked backwards slowly, breath held, pulse thudding in my throat like a war drum. The moment I turned my back, I felt it. Not pain, not contact. Invasion, like something reached through my skin and pulled my thoughts forward, rummaging through memories like old files. I could feel them seeing me, everything, my roots, my habits, the nights I repeated my drives, the music, the voice messages, the photos I'd taken in Sedona. They weren't following. They were mapping, reconstructing me, trying to understand what I was. And just when I thought they might hollow me out completely, I remembered something, a sound from the campground. That low droning hum, I mimicked it deep in my chest, a guttural vibration, shaky and raw. And suddenly, the pull stopped, the lights retreated, the humming in the ground cut out, and I was left panting, terrified, alone in the dark. That sound, they knew it. They recognized it. And I think maybe they thought I was one of them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the front seat of the van with the doors locked, a knife in my lap, and my hands still shaking from whatever had just happened in that ravine. Every few minutes, I'd hum again, just enough to keep that low vibration alive in my chest, just in case they came back, just in case it really worked. I didn't even know what the sound meant. I didn't care. I just knew it had stopped them. By morning, my voice was raw, my throat burned. But the lights didn't return. The structure in the ravine remained buried. And the silence that followed wasn't the clean kind. It was the kind that lingers after a scream, like the land was holding its breath. I left New Mexico that day, crossed into Arizona again, even though every part of me wanted to stay away. Something about the desert had changed me. I could feel it, like a piece of whatever I had touched, the lights, the object, the pattern, had embedded itself in my nervous system. I saw flickers where there were no lights, heard echoes of voices I'd never spoken to. I knew it wasn't over. They didn't want me gone. They wanted to understand why I broke the loop, why I deviated. I drove north through Flagstaff toward Navajo land. I kept moving, kept improvising. No patterns, no routines. I slept in new places each night. I didn't take photos, I didn't document anything, but I felt them behind me, not chasing, not hunting, just tracking, studying. That was the worst part, really. Not being prey, but being a specimen. Not a threat, not even a subject, just a curiosity, the kind of thing you'd circle in a field guide and make notes beside. On the third night back in Arizona, I stopped at a rest area outside Tuba City. I knew it was risky, but I needed water, needed to charge, needed to breathe without my hands shaking. There was an older Navajo woman sitting on the bench outside the bathroom. She was dressed plainly, layered skirts, worn jacket, one hand resting gently on a cane. Her eyes locked with mine the second I stepped out of the van. "You've seen them," she said. "No question. Just fact." I stopped in my tracks. "You've seen the lights, felt the pull. You ran. You broke the rhythm." My heart pounded. She nodded slowly, like she was confirming something she'd already sensed. "They come more often now. Every season a few more vanish. Those who keep to the old ways, move with the stars, not the clocks, they last longer. But those who loop," her eyes darkened, "they're taken." I sat beside her, feeling like a child. I didn't know why, but tears burned at the corners of my eyes. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was recognition. Maybe it was just that, for the first time, someone else understood. "I thought I was going crazy," I whispered. "You're not, but you're close." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They don't want your body. Not really. They want your routine, your habits, the echoes you leave behind when you move the same way over and over. That's what they feed on. That's what they record." I stared at her, numb. "Then how do I stop it?" She smiled, almost sadly. "You already did." A silence stretched between us. "Then why are they still watching?" She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "Because you're the one that got away. That makes you interesting. That makes you dangerous. They're not done learning from you, but you're not helpless either." She pulled a small pouch from her coat and handed it to me. Inside was a thin band of braided leather, darkened with age. At its center was a single carved stone, etched with a symbol I didn't recognize, like a spiral colliding with a star. "Wear it. Keep changing. Don't return to what you've already done. Don't stay anywhere more than once. And don't hum unless you have to." I stared at the band. What does the symbol mean? It means you see the watchers, but you walk anyway. I put it on. I didn't ask her name. She was gone when I woke up the next morning. No footprints. No sign she'd ever been there. The bathroom was locked. The bench empty. But the wind had returned. The air felt breathable again. And for the first time in days, I could see birds in the sky. I drove again, not to flee, but to shift, to outmaneuver, to confuse the rhythm they were trying to map from me. Somewhere outside Chinle, I passed a small trailer off the highway. It looked abandoned, but there was music coming from it. Something low and strange, like throat singing layered with static. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. But in my mirrors, for just a breath of a second, I saw 3 small lights hovering just above its roof. Not coming toward me, not reaching, just watching, waiting, as if to say, "We remember." They don't always chase. Sometimes they only observe. And sometimes that's worse, because it means they've already learned what they needed to learn. And the next time, they'll act. I kept heading northwest, chasing roads I hadn't driven, towns I hadn't stayed in. I deleted old GPS data, switched devices, didn't log my locations. I even stopped journaling because I started to realize even memory could be a pattern. And they were watching for patterns. That's how they hunted. Not like wolves, more like algorithms. Things that didn't need time the way we did. Things that could wait. Things that could watch loops form over weeks, months, years, and only then decide to intervene. I didn't know how long I could keep moving like this, living this way, sleeping in new places every night. But I knew what would happen if I didn't. I'd seen what they could do to a person's mind, how they could bend the sky and twist the light and crawl inside your thoughts without ever leaving a mark. There were moments, even while driving, when I'd suddenly feel like I was repeating a scene. Déjà vu. Not the normal kind, not the kind where you go, that feels familiar. No, this was exact. I'd look out the window and see the same crow fly over the same dead Joshua tree at the same speed, flapping in the same rhythm. I'd pass the same hitchhiker, the same flattened beer can in the same place on the same mile marker, and I'd know they were testing me. To see if I noticed, to see if I reacted, because the moment I did, the moment I acknowledged the repetition, they'd know where to find me again. That was the trap. You didn't just get stuck in a loop, you became the loop. And the more you noticed it, the more real it became. So I stopped reacting. I let the crow fly. I let the hitchhiker stand. I kept driving, eyes forward, humming under my breath. Not the hum from the ravine, not exactly. Just a rhythm I made up, one that didn't repeat. A melody I'd never heard before, changing each time I breathed it. I stayed in a lot of places over the next few weeks. Off-grid pullouts, forgotten dirt lots on BLM land, a spot by an abandoned mining road near Jerome where the rocks whispered if you pressed your ear against them. I kept to myself, stayed off social media, cut the last threads of anything that could connect me to a routine. I wasn't lost. I was free. Or I thought I was. Until I got to Sedona. It was never my plan to return. But something drew me back. I wish I could explain it in a way that made sense. Maybe it was the dream I had the night before I arrived, where I was floating above the red rocks and each one pulsed with light like a heartbeat. Maybe it was the note I found tucked into my glove box, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. It only said, "The line isn't broken yet. Finish the cycle." I should have turned back. I should have kept going, but I didn't, because part of me still needed to know why I'd been chosen. I needed answers. And sometimes answers are more dangerous than the unknown. I drove into Sedona at twilight. The sky bled orange across the boots. The air was heavy with heat and silence. Not stillness, silence. Like even the bugs and birds were holding their breath, like the rocks themselves were listening. I parked in the same dispersed camping area where all of this had started. I told myself I was just closing the loop, finishing the story, bookending the thing so I could finally let it go. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't closure. This was invitation. The moment I stepped out of the van, I felt it, a deep buzzing under the ground, not an earthquake, not the hum of power lines. It was lower than that, beneath hearing, beneath knowing. It was welcoming me back. The sky overhead shifted. The colors got deeper, like blood thickening in water, and the air took on that same electric sting I'd felt in New Mexico. I walked to the edge of the bluff and waited. For what? I wasn't sure, until the first light rose. Not a star, not a drone, not a plane, just a sphere, pale blue, trembling in the sky like it was breathing. Then another, and another, 3. They hovered, closer than they had before, lower, brighter. I didn't hum, I didn't run. I just stood there and let them see me. Because I realized something in that moment, something that changed the shape of my fear. They weren't here to take me. They were here to mirror me, to reflect the patterns we make without thinking, to test whether we'd notice. And the moment I broke the cycle, they had to change too. I'd corrupted their loop. The sphere on the left pulsed once, then drifted downward, not fast, not aggressive, just intentional, like it was asking me to follow. I should have been terrified. I wasn't. I felt clarity, not peace, but understanding. Like I was standing at the center of something ancient, something vast, and it had finally turned to look at me. I followed. Through the scrub, down into the brush, back toward the trail that didn't appear on maps, the same one from before. But this time, it wasn't empty. There were others. Figures standing still between the trees. Some human, some not quite. And each one turned toward me as I passed, like they knew me, like they recognized the shape of my thoughts, the distortion I'd left behind by stepping off the track. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe too hard, because I knew whatever came next was the reason I'd been brought back. I don't remember how long I walked. That place doesn't respect time. You move by intention, not by distance. The landscape warps, not like sci-fi bending, not surreal. It's more subtle than that. It's like a trail that forgets it was supposed to lead somewhere, and suddenly you're surrounded by rock walls that weren't there before. You glance behind you, and the way back is gone. And yet, I wasn't scared, not like before. There was something else now, not calm, not bravery, just surrender. Not the giving up kind, no. I mean the kind where your body and your brain stop resisting reality. They let go of what they thought the world was and allow it to be what it actually is. We walked, me and the lights. The lowest sphere hovered only a few feet above the ground now, its glow softer, almost shy, like it was nervous to show me something or ashamed. The other two circled overhead, farther out. Guardians? Witnesses? I didn't know. But I knew this. They weren't random. They weren't natural. And they weren't new. They'd been here longer than anyone. Longer than the Anasazi. Longer than the rocks. Maybe even longer than fear itself. We came to a place where the trail broke open into a flat basin of white stone, limestone polished smooth like it had been walked for centuries. The blue sphere paused at the edge, then dipped lower. There was something in the center of the basin. A mark. No, an indentation. A bowl carved deep into the stone like the earth had once held something there. Something massive. Not machinery. Not a ship. More like a presence. Like gravity had remembered a shape so clearly it couldn't let go of the impression. I stepped into the basin. The temperature dropped, not sharply, slowly like a soft descent into ice. The sound in my ears dulled, and all I could hear was my own breath and the whisper of the wind curling in patterns I'd never heard wind make before. And then the dreams returned. Not like before. Not memories. These came while I was awake. Standing there, eyes wide open, I saw flashes. A woman crouched beside a campfire, her hands covered in soot, whispering numbers into a tape recorder. A man lying flat on the floor of his RV, eyes wide, mouth slack, as something outside stared through the walls. A girl standing on a bluff in Sedona, reaching upward, and the sky responding, not with thunder, but with mimicry. They weren't strangers. They were me. Not metaphors, not symbolic projections, versions of me, different timelines, different outcomes, different results of different choices. I saw the one who ran that first night and never came back. He drank himself sick in Nebraska, still hearing the hum until he finally wrapped his RV around a tree in the dark. I saw the version who tried to fight the lights. He carried weapons, paranoia, hate, and they consumed him. Not in body, in mind. He never knew they'd already won. And then I saw the version who followed all the way, who let the hum into his chest, who didn't just observe the loop, he became part of it. And for a moment, he looked back at me. Our eyes met across time or space or whatever thin veil the lights pierced. And he smiled. Not a cruel smile, not triumphant, just tired, like someone who'd finally accepted the truth. And when that smile broke, so did the basin. Not physically, not in any way I could explain, but I felt it. The entire structure of what I thought was real shivered, like glass under pressure. I staggered back. The lights flared. And then I was somewhere else. Back at the edge of the canyon, same clothes, same time of day, same position. But my van was gone. There were no tire tracks, no sign I had ever been there. And the trail I had followed, it wasn't there either, just smooth, untouched desert. I stood in silence, trying to understand whether I had hallucinated everything, whether exhaustion or dehydration had broken me at last. But then I heard it, a voice. My voice, coming from behind me. I turned slowly, and standing there, 30 feet away, was me. Not an illusion, not a reflection. Me. Different clothes, different haircut, but the same eyes, same mouth. He didn't look surprised, didn't speak, he just watched. And then he nodded once, turned, and walked back into the red rocks. Gone, like he'd never existed. But I knew. I knew then, with a clarity I have never known before or since, there were more of us than I could imagine. All versions, all choices, all looping through this place, in and out of timelines and threads and decisions. And the lights were shepherds, not saviors, not demons, not aliens in the way we understand. Curators. They collect what we could be. They preserve the loops. They don't interfere unless you try to escape without learning what you need to. That's what I had done, and that's why they let me come back, because I was ready now. Ready for what? I didn't know yet, but I would. I walked back to the road. Still no van, no sounds, no sign of life, but I knew what I had to do next. Because once you've seen yourself from the outside, you can't just go back, you become the loop, or you break it. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. Not because I was afraid. Not anymore. Fear was something simpler, cleaner, something you could name. But what I carried with me now didn't have a shape. It just existed. An atmosphere around my skin, a constant pressure just behind my eyes. You don't just see something like that and forget. You don't go back to small talk and traffic and radio stations. You learn to live beside the thing you saw. To move through the world like you're not a split thread of a larger fabric, like you're not being watched, because I was. I still am. But not in the creepy way we usually mean. I mean, watched in the way a museum curator might hover behind glass, making sure the sculpture doesn't chip, doesn't fall, doesn't escape. After that night, I walked Highway 179 barefoot until I saw the first car. It didn't stop. The second one did. A woman named Carla, mid-50s blonde braid, big Labrador in the back seat. She was headed to Flagstaff, said I looked like I'd been talking to spirits or chasing devils. I just nodded. I didn't ask for a ride. She offered it. Didn't ask for my story, just told me hers. Divorced, retired nurse, likes reading about old trail medicine and weird Sedona folklore. When I asked her if she believed in the vortex stuff, she smiled, slow and tired. You don't have to believe in what you are, honey, she said. You just have to live it. That stuck with me. When I got to Flagstaff, I checked into a cheap roadside motel, one of those places where the blankets still smell like the 70s and the vending machine hums all night. The man at the front desk looked at me like he recognized something. Not me, exactly. Something behind my eyes. He didn't ask questions, just slid the key across the counter. Room 106. I stared at the number for a long time before I went in. I dreamed that night. Not of the lights, not of other versions of myself, but of the spaces between, of the places those lights come from. Not worlds, not planets, ideas. Places where ideas live before they become matter. Places where choices grow legs and walk. You don't need to believe me. I wouldn't if I were you. I'm not telling this because I want you to nod along and whisper about dimensions and portals and ancient civilizations. That's all window dressing. I'm telling you this because you'll go there too. Maybe not Sedona, but somewhere out there in a national park or a red desert or a piney campground where the fire won't start and the air tastes wrong. The hum, the static that curls under your tongue and makes you forget why you came. And when you feel that, when the lights come, you'll have a choice. Run and forget, or stay and remember. Because that's the secret. That's what they're here for. Not to take you, not to hurt you, to remind you of what you are, what you were, what you still could be. Most people aren't ready. Most people flinch and blink and rationalize. They say, I must have been tired, or it was just the stars reflecting weird, or I heard a weird noise, but I think it was just coyotes. We all say those things until we can't anymore. until the light sits in the air like judgment and possibility wrapped in one blinding pulse, and without anyone telling you that you were supposed to be more. And maybe, still can be, but not unless you surrender. I stayed in that motel for 2 more nights, and then I bought a new van. Not a Volkswagen this time, a Ford. Reliable, boring, gray. I didn't go back to Sedona, but I didn't avoid it either. I just circled around the edges between the rocks. I watched the tourists take selfies on the vortex trails. I saw the New Agers with their singing bowls and crystals. I saw the skeptics rolling their eyes. But every once in a while, I'd see someone else, someone quiet, someone watching the rocks the same way I did, with memory. And I'd nod to them. And sometimes they'd nod back. We don't speak. We don't need to. Because once you've seen the lights, once you've stepped into the loop and come back out, you carry it forever. It flickers behind your pupils, hums under your breath, rattles your bones on cold nights when the wind hits just wrong and the fire won't catch. I'm telling you all this now, not because I think you'll believe me, but because someday you'll feel it. Out there, under the stars, when the silence grows too thick and the dark doesn't feel empty anymore. And when it comes, when the hum starts and the lights rise, you'll remember me. You'll remember this voice, and maybe you'll do what I couldn't. Maybe you'll stay. Maybe you'll finish the loop, or maybe you'll run. Either way, the lights will follow. They always do. It's been 2 years since that night. I've camped in 27 states since then, parked beside Blackwater rivers in Louisiana, beneath snowy ridgelines in Idaho. I've seen moons so big they looked fake, and skies so clear they made me feel like I never existed at all. I still carry the burn scar on my left hand from where the radio exploded. I still wake up at 3:17 a.m. for no reason, like my body's answering a call I can't hear. But most days, I feel normal. I drink my coffee, I check tire pressure, I map routes on dusty paper atlases. I wave to other campers on the road and pretend like I'm just another traveler, and I am. Except when I pass Sedona, when the rocks blush that impossible red and the air folds in on itself like breath, I feel it again. The hum. Not loud anymore, not sharp or demanding, just a whisper, like a pulse beneath the ground, like the ghost of a choice I almost made. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stepped into that beam, if I'd said yes, if I'd become whatever it wanted me to be. But then I think, maybe I already did. Maybe the version of me that walked out of that canyon wasn't the one who walked in. I've thought a lot about that ranger too, McAllister, his stories, his warnings, his silence. He tried to tell me in his own way. I just wasn't listening. But I am now, to everything. The way animals go quiet before storms, the way your thoughts get slippery around certain places, the way time stretches in the desert too long, too still, like it's waiting for something. I don't chase answers anymore. I don't need to understand where the lights come from or what they want. That's not the point. The point is, they're real. And not just in Sedona. I've met others now. In Montana, a woman with 3 clocks in her van that never match. In West Virginia, a man who hears voices through the CB radio, but only when it rains. In Nevada, a kid who draws maps of campsites he's never been to, places that don't exist on satellite view but do if you go far enough into the hills. We all wear that look now, that haunted calm. Not broken, just changed. And all of us, in our own quiet way, are trying to warn the rest of you. Not to scare you, to wake you up. Because the lights, the hum, the echo in your chest when you pass certain stretches of land and feel like you've been there before, even though you haven't, that's not imagination. It's not madness. It's reminder. You weren't built for cubicles and traffic lights. You weren't meant to scroll your life away inside glowing rectangles while the sky performs above you like a miracle you never look up to see. You were built for firelight, for dirt under your nails and smoke in your clothes and waking up to something ancient whispering just outside your tent flap. You were built to remember. And that's what the lights do. They show you what's been buried, not just in the desert, in you, your instinct, your wildness, your truth. I don't know what comes next for me. I don't think I'll ever settle in one place again. But if you ever see a gray Ford van parked alone off some red clay service road, windows open, smoke curling from a small fire, maybe you'll stop. Maybe you'll pull up and sit for a while. And maybe I'll tell you what I saw. Or maybe I won't need to. Maybe by then you'll know. Maybe the lights have already found you too. And if they haven't, they will. Because they're not from this world. But they're not here to destroy it either. They're here to remind us how far we've drifted from who we are. And if you're quiet, if you still your breath and step outside the noise, you might hear it, that hum, that call, the one that says you were meant for more, not more money, not more followers, more presence, more truth, more wonder. And when it comes, when the lights rise above the trees and your memory begins to rearrange itself into something ancient and electric, you'll have a choice. You can run or you can stay. And remember. They say the trees in Appalachia remember everything. Not just the storms that rolled through or the footsteps that wandered too far from the trail, but the intentions, the grief, the guilt, the weight you carry in your chest. I didn't understand that when I rolled into the woods that fall, chasing silence in a place that hears better than it speaks. It was early October when I parked my Volkswagen Westphalia just past a little county road south of Elkins, West Virginia. The leaves were starting to turn, the hills blushing with orange and crimson like they were embarrassed to be watched. I'd been on the road for months, trying to outrun something I didn't want to name, and Appalachia felt like the kind of place that might let me breathe again. Quiet, remote, old in a way that felt rooted. The kind of old that listens before it judges. I wasn't alone on the trip. My friend Mark had driven out from Ohio to meet me. We were both in our mid-30s, both tired of trying to pretend city life hadn't chewed us up in different ways. He'd just gotten laid off. I just ended a long-term relationship that had, in retrospect, turned toxic months before I had the courage to leave. The idea was to unplug, reconnect, heal, maybe hike some trails that hadn't seen human boots in a while. We set up camp off a Forest Service road that wasn't even labeled on the map, just a gravel artery that led deeper into green nothing. No cell service, no lights, just the slow creak of the van settling and the whisper of wind through branches that didn't seem to like us much. The first night we drank too much by the fire and swapped ghost stories like kids at a sleepover. We laughed until our sides hurt. But even then, I remember feeling it. The quiet between gusts of wind. Not peaceful quiet, watchful. The kind that makes the hair rise behind your ears. I chalked it up to nerves. New places do that to you, especially when they're this wild, this untouched. But by the second night, that feeling hadn't gone away. Mark was down by the stream about 100 yards from the van, cleaning dishes in the dark. I was inside the Westie, sitting at the small table, writing in my journal with a red lantern dimmed low. That's when I heard the knock, 3 sharp taps against the driver's side window. Not the rustle of a branch, not an animal brushing past, a knock. Measured. Intentional. I froze. My pen hovered mid-sentence. The air in the van felt suddenly thick, like it had stopped moving. Mark? I called, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked halfway through. No response. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The night was darker than I remembered, like the stars had dimmed. The fire had burned down to coals, barely flickering. My boots crunched softly on the pine needles as I moved around to the front of the van. No one was there. I stood in that silence for maybe a full minute, just listening. The only sound was the stream off in the distance and the occasional gust of wind ruffling through the trees. Then I heard Mark laughing, way too far from where he was supposed to be. His voice echoed oddly through the woods, like it was bouncing off something that shouldn't have been there. Something too close. I followed the sound downhill, flashlights sweeping side to side. My brain kept trying to explain it. Echoes. Weird acoustics. Maybe he slipped and fell, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I reached the stream, he wasn't there. No dishes, no flashlight, just the water rolling smooth and dark between the rocks. I called his name again, still nothing, and then, I swear this is true, I heard my own voice call back to me from the trees. Not an echo, a mimic. Slightly wrong in pitch, but unmistakably mine. I bolted. I don't remember getting back to the van. I just remember slamming the sliding door shut and locking everything I could lock. I curled up in the back, gripping my camp knife, shaking like a child under a thunderstorm. Eventually, Mark returned. Through the window, I saw him walking up slowly, casually, like nothing had happened. He looked off. I almost didn't open the door. When I did, I asked him where he'd been, and he blinked at me like I was speaking another language. "I was just washing dishes," he said. "You okay, man? You look like you saw a ghost." I wanted to tell him what I'd heard, what I'd seen, but my throat felt tight. Like if I spoke it aloud, it would make it real. Instead, I nodded. Told him I must have just dozed off and had a weird dream. He didn't press. We didn't talk about it the next morning either. He acted totally normal, cooking breakfast like always, sipping coffee and pointing out hawks overhead. I kept scanning the tree line, waiting for another voice that didn't belong to either of us. We hiked that day, took an overgrown trail we found about half a mile east of camp. It twisted through thick underbrush and eventually opened up to a ridge that overlooked miles of forest. For a few minutes, I felt okay again. Like maybe I had imagined it all. Then we saw the staircase. It was just standing there in the middle of a clearing. Old wooden steps, gray with rot, leading nowhere. No house, no platform, just a staircase rising out of the earth like some forgotten relic. We both stopped walking. Neither of us said a word for a full minute. "Do you think?" I started, but I couldn't finish the sentence. Mark walked up to it. I wanted to yell at him to stop, but the words caught in my throat again. He reached out and touched the rail. It creaked under his hand like it was alive. "I've heard about stuff like this," he muttered. "Urban legends. Staircases in the woods. People say you're not supposed to touch them, but you just did." He looked back at me with an odd smile. Curiosity kills cats, not campers. That night, everything changed. Mark wasn't himself. He didn't say anything unusual at first, just made jokes over dinner, laughed a little too loud, told me I was being paranoid, but there was something wrong in his voice, like a lag in emotion. The words were coming out fine, but they didn't sit right in my bones. They felt displaced, hollow. I tried not to overreact. Maybe we were both just sleep-deprived, worn down from the weight of our lives and the isolation of the woods. That's what I told myself as we sat beside the fire. The flames popped and hissed like they were straining to be heard over some deeper noise I couldn't quite detect. It wasn't until we were getting ready for bed that I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Mark had a cut on his left hand. Small, about the width of a pencil. I only saw it because he dropped a fork and went to pick it up under the dim lantern light. It looked clean, too clean, almost surgical. I asked him what happened. He stared at me for a second too long before answering. Must have scraped it on something. The staircase, maybe. The air between us shifted. I stared at him, waiting for more. He didn't offer it, just turned away and climbed into his tent like it was nothing. I didn't sleep, not even for a second. The forest sounded different. The usual night chorus, crickets, owls, the occasional scampering animal was gone, replaced by a pulse. Not audible exactly, but present. Like the trees themselves were breathing in sync, holding their breath while something passed by. Or through. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps circling the van. Soft, deliberate, one after the other. They crunched lightly on the pine needles. I lay there motionless, breathing through my nose, barely daring to blink. At first, I assumed it was Mark going to take a leak, but the steps didn't wander off toward the woods like they usually did. They circled. Once, twice, then stopped, right by the sliding door. A pause. Then a slow drag of fingers across the metal, long nails or maybe sticks, I couldn't tell. The noise sent every muscle in my body locking up. I waited, counting seconds in my head. 40, 50, 60. Then I peeked through the blinds. There was no one there. But Mark's tent was empty. The zipper was open halfway like it had been rushed or left mid-movement. I should have gone looking. I should have shouted his name, but I didn't. Something told me not to. Something deep in my chest said, "Stay in the van. Do not go into the woods tonight." So I waited. At 3:17 a.m., I heard Mark's voice outside, calm and relaxed. "Dude, you awake?" He wasn't near the door. He was farther away, somewhere just beyond the fire ring, where the trees started thickening. "I think I saw something. Come check this out." I didn't move. My breath felt sharp in my lungs, like cold metal. He called again. Same tone. Casual. Too casual. "Hey." "Come on, man. You gotta see this." That wasn't how Mark talked. Not even when he was sober, and definitely not in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere. I stayed silent. After a while, the voice stopped, and then I heard a second voice. It was my own. From out in the trees, maybe 50 feet away. It was saying the same thing. "Come check this out." Exactly the same cadence, the same emphasis. I curled up in the far corner of the van and kept the knife in my hand until morning. When the sun finally rose, Mark was back in his tent. I stood over it for several minutes before I dared unzip it. He was inside, sleeping, breathing slowly. I could see condensation on the tent fabric from his breath. He looked normal, too normal. I woke him, asked where he'd been. He just blinked like he didn't understand the question. "Slept great," he said. "Didn't even have to get up to pee." No acknowledgement. No sign he knew he'd been gone. We packed up that afternoon. I told him we needed to leave, that something felt wrong. He didn't argue, just nodded like I'd confirmed something he already knew but didn't want to say. We drove for hours, trying to find a road that wasn't there anymore. Every time I thought we were making progress, every time the GPS flickered back to life or we saw a familiar curve in the forest road, we ended up right back where we'd started, at that same clearing, that same fire pit, that same rotting staircase standing in the trees like a splinter in the world. Mark got quieter the third time we circled back. By the fourth, he stopped responding to me altogether. I don't know what part of the forest we were in. Not anymore. The roads didn't match the maps. The sun hung in the sky too long and then vanished all at once, like someone had thrown a blanket over the hills. It was disorienting, like time had folded in on itself. I tried turning the van around, driving in reverse, using the stars. Nothing worked. The compass on the dashboard spun without direction. Even the birds stopped flying overhead. Eventually, I broke down and screamed into the woods. Not words, just frustration, rage, fear. And the forest, it answered. It wasn't an echo. It was laughter. Low, guttural, like old wood splitting. Mark started laughing too. But it wasn't right. It didn't reach his eyes. It sounded like something else was laughing through his body, like it was using his mouth but had no idea how to fake being human. And then he turned and said something that chilled me so deep I still hear it sometimes when I close my eyes. "You brought it here. You brought it back. You brought it here. You brought it back." I stared at him, waiting for a punchline, a smirk, some shred of the guy I'd grown up with, but his face was flat, vacant. There was no flicker of recognition, just those words hanging between us like a dropped thread, full of weight I didn't understand. I didn't respond. I just turned away and walked. Into the woods. Anywhere. Because I had to clear my head, because that place, that van, that version of Mark, none of it made sense anymore. It felt like the edges of reality were fraying, and the only way to keep from unraveling with it was to move. The trees closed in like a tunnel. I didn't care where the path went. I just followed my feet, crunching over old needles, broken branches, damp earth. I walked until the van disappeared behind me, until the air changed again. It was cooler here. Still, too still. I should have been afraid. But instead, I felt numb, like some part of me had already accepted that I wasn't going back the same way I came. Then I saw it, the staircase, another one. It wasn't the same as before. This one was stone, half buried in the ground, overgrown with moss and vines, crumbling. It looked ancient, like it had been there long before the forest swallowed it. It led nowhere, just rose 6, maybe 7 steps into open air, crowned by sunlight breaking through the trees. No platform, no building, just steps, hanging in place like a scar. I stood at the bottom for a long time, not moving, not thinking. Something pulled at me, an ache, a curiosity, maybe a memory. I couldn't explain it. I put one foot on the bottom step, and I heard a whisper. Not behind me, not in front of me, inside me. It wasn't in English. It wasn't even in words. It was sound, carved into instinct. Like my body recognized it before my mind could, like a warning my blood had been holding onto for years. I took my foot off the step, backed away, and the forest breathed out. I mean that literally. I felt the wind push past me in a wave, lifting leaves, carrying a stench like rotting bark and wet iron. It passed over me, through me. I stumbled, heart pounding, throat dry, and when I looked back, the staircase was gone. Just trees, just moss. Nothing but green and silence. I ran. I don't know how far or how long. Time had no weight anymore. Every step felt like it moved sideways through reality. The branches blurred. My breath was raw in my chest. I only stopped when I saw the van again, sunlight hitting it just right through the trees like it had been placed there for effect. Mark was sitting on the roof, just sitting there, swinging his legs like a kid, grinning wide. "You good now?" he asked. "Get it out of your system?" I didn't answer. I opened the door, climbed inside, locked it behind me. I knew it wouldn't help, not against whatever this was. But I needed something that felt like control. I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel like a lifeline, staring out through the windshield at the trees. That's when I noticed it again. We weren't in the same clearing. It looked like it. Same shape, same stump, same half-burnt firewood, but there was no trail behind us anymore, no tire tracks, no footprints, just untouched earth, and the staircase was back. Not the stone one, the first one, the wooden one. But this time, it wasn't standing. It was sitting in front of the van, like it had moved there, like it wanted us to see it, to remember it, and something was standing at the top. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It had a shape, a silhouette, long-limbed, too long, shoulders hunched forward like it had never stood fully upright. It was watching us. I could feel its focus like static, the way your skin crawls when a wild animal is sizing you up. Mark didn't see it, or he acted like he didn't. He just climbed back down, walked around to the passenger side, and got in like nothing had changed, like there wasn't a thing outside, waiting. "We should stay another night," he said casually, like we were at a KOA with clean bathrooms and picnic tables. I turned to him slowly. "What do you remember about last night?" I asked. He blinked. "We had chili. You were freaking out. And the staircase?" His mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something else. "What staircase?" he said. I drove. Didn't know where. Didn't care. The tires crunched over leaves and debris, but there was no road. Just trees. Just mist. Just the loop. Until we hit the dead end. A sheer drop. A cliff I swear hadn't been there before. Just red earth split open like a wound, with the trees bending away from it in fear. And at the edge, another staircase. This one stone again. Narrower. It jutted from the cliff face, curving downward into fog like a twisted spine. It didn't look climbable. It didn't look real. But Mark opened his door, started walking toward it. I yelled. I begged him to stop, to think. He didn't even look back, just kept going, calm and slow like he was following a memory deeper than thought. I chased him. He was already at the edge when I reached him, one foot hovering over the first step. "I saw it before," he whispered. "Years ago, in a dream, at a different camp. I didn't go then." "Mark, come back." He turned, and for just a second his eyes flickered, not metaphorically, literally. They flickered like a reel of film catching on a broken frame. One moment he was Mark, the next he was something else, something older. "I think I'm supposed to," he said. Then he stepped down and vanished into the fog. I didn't follow. I couldn't, because in that moment I understood. He hadn't been Mark for days. I stood there staring at the place where he disappeared, into that swirling fog below the cliff, down that staircase that had no right existing. The air was perfectly still now. Not a single leaf moved. The forest didn't breathe anymore. It watched. And I knew, whatever Mark had become, it hadn't just taken him. It had been waiting for him. Maybe for both of us. Maybe for anyone foolish enough to wander this deep into the green, where no trails held, where no GPS could reach, and where things older than language remembered your name before you were born. I backed away slowly from the cliff's edge. My body shook with something primal, deeper than fear. It was a grief I didn't understand yet. Like part of me already knew I'd never see him again, not as he was. Maybe not even as something I could recognize. I made it back to the van, but the woods were different now. They felt closer. The trees had shifted, subtly, imperceptibly, closing ranks around me. And the van didn't look like it had when I left it. There were marks on the windows, long, curved smears, almost like greasy fingerprints. And on the side of the van, just above the back wheel well, a handprint, but not a human one. Too many fingers, too wide. And it had left behind something oily and dark that smelled like sap mixed with copper. I didn't touch it. I climbed in and started the engine. It turned over once, twice, nothing. The third time, it groaned to life, sputtering like it was gasping for breath. The headlights cut through the mist, but only barely, like the air had thickened. I turned the van around and drove. Didn't think. Just drove. I picked the path that felt wrong, the one I'd avoided before. I figured whatever this place wanted, it had gotten. Maybe I had a window to escape now. I wish I could say the drive out was just confusing, but it wasn't. It was impossible. I drove for hours. Trees passed by again and again. The same split trunk, the same rock covered in orange lichen, the same bent signpost half buried in the brush. I started marking them with spray paint from the back of the van. Red dots. Big circles. They kept showing up. No matter how many turns I took, how many paths I followed, I always looped back. And once, as I passed the rock for what felt like the 10th time, I saw something sitting on it. A backpack. Marks. I slammed the brakes, got out, walked over. It was his. I recognized the patch he'd stitched to the front pocket, an old punk band we used to love back in high school. But the zipper was broken now, torn sideways like it had been yanked open too hard. I looked inside. Nothing but rocks. All the weight I thought was food, water, gear. It was just flat stones, all marked with strange carvings, sharp symbols I couldn't decipher. They burned into my vision even after I closed the flap. I dropped the pack and backed away. I didn't hear the forest anymore. No bugs, no birds, no wind, just breath. Not mine, not close, but all around. Massive and slow, like the woods themselves had lungs and were holding in the next exhale just for me. That's when I saw the lights. At first, I thought they were just reflections, maybe a parked ranger truck up ahead, but they didn't flicker or swing like headlights through trees. They just hovered. Suspended in midair, maybe 10 or 15 feet above the ground, in a perfect triangle. White. Steady. Cold. I ducked back into the van and turned it back on, engine whining louder than before, almost angry. I started driving toward them. I know that sounds stupid, but part of me thought, this is it. This is the way out. Someone's signaling. A road. A ranger station. Maybe even another hiker who saw something. Anything. But the closer I got, the lights didn't move, and when I got within 50 feet, the van died. Completely. No sputter. No warning. Just silence. The dash lights faded out. The radio flickered and popped, then went black. Then the lights above shifted. Not forward. Not back. Down. They descended in perfect unison, still holding the triangle, until they stopped just above the ground, hovering maybe 3 feet up just past the tree line. I opened the driver's side window. That was a mistake. The air that poured in wasn't forest air. It was cold, yes, but dry, like wind off a glacier, and it carried a scent that twisted something in me. Not rot, not sulfur, but memory. I smelled my grandfather's basement from childhood, wet cardboard and old photo albums. I smelled the hallways of my elementary school. I smelled the inside of the tent from my first camping trip, the one where I thought I saw eyes outside the mesh door, but told myself it was just fireflies. That's when I heard the knocking. Not from outside, from inside the van. It came from under the sink cabinet, 3 short knocks, then nothing. My breath caught. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then again, knock, knock, knock. I crouched, moved toward the back of the van, opened the small wooden cabinet door like it was Pandora's box. Nothing. Just the coiled water hose and a box of matches. I reached in, touched the hose. It was warm. Then I saw the fingers. Thin, pale, pressed to the inside of the van's rear window. From inside, as if something had climbed up behind the storage shelf and wedged itself between the spare tire and the rear wall. I stepped back, heart in my throat, and then the voice came. But not from the back. From everywhere. It said my name, not loud, not angry, just calm, familiar. Illy! It was Mark's voice, but it wasn't Mark. I knew that now. Eli. That voice still rings in my head like a half-remembered lullaby warped through static. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Every instinct screamed that whatever said my name knew I'd hesitate. That hesitation was its invitation, and it was waiting. The fingers disappeared from the back window. The lights outside blinked, one by one, left to right, and vanished into the dark. And then the forest exhaled. Wind rushed through the trees again like breath long held finally released. Crickets chirped, an owl hooted somewhere in the canopy. My headlights came back on. I didn't even try to start the van. I just sat in the driver's seat, frozen. I watched the woods reset around me like some ancient system had powered down, and I was just the mouse still caught in the circuit. Eventually, minutes? Hours? I turned the key. The van roared to life on the first try. I drove. Didn't look at the trees, didn't check the rear view. I picked a random logging road that sloped downhill and followed it. The sun started rising. I hadn't realized it was that late. But it wasn't a warm sunrise. It was gray, the kind of morning that looks like it's still deciding whether it wants to be dawn or storm. Mist clung to the branches and the tires kicked up steam off the cold, wet earth. Eventually, I hit pavement, an old state road with cracked yellow lines and moss between the asphalt splits. I didn't care. I just drove until I had signal again and pulled into a gas station off I-26 near Mars Hill. That was 3 days ago. I didn't tell anyone. Not the guy at the gas station, not the waitress at the Waffle House I stumbled into, not even my brother when he called to ask how the trip was going. I told him I cut it short. Said the weather was bad and the roads were crap. He believed me. Because of course he did. Who would believe the truth? That I watched my friend walk into the woods and vanish. That his voice followed me into my van. That something out there wears his memory like a costume. But I'm not just telling this for therapy. I'm telling it because yesterday I got a message. It showed up in my email inbox from an address I didn't recognize. Just one line. Found your backpack. Come get it. There was a photo attached. Mark standing on a dirt path I didn't recognize, smiling, wearing clothes I'd never seen him wear before. His skin looked pale, tight, but his eyes weren't his. I deleted it, blocked the address, powered off my laptop and threw it in the back of the van. But last night, while I was parked at a campground in Tennessee, someone knocked on my van door 3 times. Not urgent, not violent, familiar. I didn't open it, just sat there, holding my breath, holding the axe I keep under the sink. After a while, the knocking stopped. But this morning, I found 3 rocks stacked on my picnic table. Flat, gray stones, each one carved with the same symbols I found in Mark's pack. I didn't touch them. I left, drove 5 hours south, didn't care where, just wanted distance. But the truth is, it's not about the place anymore. It's about what's attached now, and I think it followed me. See, I thought those woods were haunted, that they held old spirits or cursed echoes. But now I understand. They're hungry. And they're patient. They don't just keep you. They send parts of you back out into the world. A smile here. A familiar voice there. Maybe a knock on the door late at night when you're parked alone in the Blue Ridge foothills. So listen, if you ever find yourself camping in the Appalachian forests, in Virginia, in North Carolina, in Tennessee or Georgia, or anywhere the trees grow too thick and the roads go unnamed, remember this. You might think you're alone. You might think your friend just went to relieve himself behind a tree. You might hear your name whispered sweetly on the wind. But trust your instincts, because whatever's whispering, whatever's knocking, whatever's using the memory of the person you once knew, it's not them. It never was. And the deeper you go, the harder it is to come back whole. You'd think that by now, with how far I've driven, how many state lines I've crossed, the fear would have faded. But it doesn't. It lingers like smoke on old clothes, quiet, stale, impossible to wash out completely. It finds me in the silence between the static of a radio and the flicker of a fire when the air gets too still. It's in the shape of a figure in the fog that always turns out to be nothing. And yet, it always makes me check twice. That's what this kind of fear does. It changes you, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, not in screams or bloody trails or ghostly possessions. No, it's subtler than that, more invasive. It rewires you. I used to laugh off weird bumps in the night, used to welcome the stillness of a foggy forest morning. I used to trust that my friends were my friends, and if someone called my name, it meant they were near. Now I second-guess every voice, every instinct, every sound I thought I understood. That's the part nobody tells you. When you experience something wrong in the woods, truly wrong, not some story for likes or a creepy tale to tell by the fire, you don't just walk away with a memory. You walk away with a wound that doesn't bleed, one you can't show. It festers quietly in your routines, in your relationships, in your view of the world. You start seeing danger in patterns that once felt safe. A trailhead with no cell signal. A campfire circle with 6 logs when there are only 5 campers. A mirror in the RV that reflects a silhouette you didn't feel standing behind you. And worst of all, the woods still call to you. They call in whispers, subtle urges to go back, to make peace, to just check one last time. But I've learned, the forest doesn't want peace, it wants pieces. And it will use whatever memory, scent, face, or sound it can to draw you in, because it's old, older than our roads and maps and even our myths. It doesn't care what you believe. It doesn't need your permission. It only needs your attention. And once it has that, it waits. See, I've read stories like this before. I've listened to podcasts, watched videos, always figured there had to be some logic, some root cause, a chemical leak, a bad mushroom trip, even just a sleep-deprived breakdown. But this was none of those things. I was sober, alert, present, and it still found me. It found Mark. And if I'm being honest with myself, it still has part of him. The worst part is, sometimes I hear him. Not in the terrifying soul-shaking way I did that night. Not in some supernatural boom or echo through the trees, but casually, like memory. Like I'm laughing at an old inside joke we had, and I hear his voice in my head giving the punchline. Or I'll be brushing my teeth in the van, and I'll swear I see him standing in the reflection of the side mirror, giving me that half smirk he always wore when I forgot to screw the cap back on the toothpaste. He's everywhere and nowhere. A ghost I carry, not one that haunts me. And I don't think that's coincidence. I think the forest made it that way. I think it wants to be remembered. It wants its victims to live on inside you, to keep you tethered, keep you afraid, keep you available. So why am I telling you all this? Because I need to warn you. I've seen a lot of beautiful places in this country. I've camped under vast stars in the Utah desert, felt the redwoods breathe in California, driven back roads through the Texas plains. But nothing feels like those woods. And not in the awe-inspiring way, in the insidious way. The Appalachian forest, especially the deep, remote parts untouched by trail markers or weekend hikers, it's not just wilderness, it's something older, hungrier. Not evil exactly, just indifferent to what you call yourself. Indifferent to whether you walk out or not, and it will offer you familiarity as bait, a voice you recognize, a face you loved, even your own reflection, a version of yourself that smiles just a little too wide. It uses what you trust to pull you in. So if you're parked out there one day, maybe sipping coffee beside your Volkswagen under the pre-dawn mist, and you hear something in the trees that makes your skin tighten, trust it. If your gut tells you not to follow the trail past the 3rd switchback, listen. If your headlights flicker in unison with your fear, Leave. Don't reason with it. Don't stay to prove you're brave. Don't convince yourself it's just in your head. Because that's the trick. The woods don't have to take you. They just have to wait until you walk in on your own. I've learned that the hard way. And every time I hear 3 knocks, every time I see stacked rocks or smell that cedar sweet rot in the air, I know I got too close again. But I remember now. I remember what I learned in the dark. That fear isn't weakness. Fear is awareness. Fear is your last tether to safety. So if you feel it, really feel it, that deep primal unease like your bones are telling you to run, run. Don't look back. Don't answer the voice calling your name. Because once you step into those shadows with your trust in anything but yourself, that's when it begins. That's when the forest remembers you. And it never, ever forgets. I never planned to drive through Utah. Not really. It was supposed to be a detour, a scenic loop on our way to Arizona, a favor to my wife Mallory, who had read somewhere about the slot canyons outside Escalante and how the sandstone lit up like fire at sunset. She always had this obsession with beauty in remote places. Me? I liked asphalt under my tires and cell signal in my pocket. But marriage is a compromise, and we'd promised ourselves this RV trip would be about getting uncomfortable, stretching our routines, breaking patterns. We were 3 months into the road, living out of a used Volkswagen Eurovan we'd refurbished ourselves. Bright yellow, noisy as hell, and just old enough to give us that romantic Wanderers in America feeling. It was the kind of thing that made your heart swell when you were parked by a lake, but made your skin crawl when the check engine light blinked on in the middle of nowhere. That's how it started. A stretch of Highway 12, just us, the van, and the desert creeping closer to night. No towns for miles, just burnt orange cliffs and juniper trees frozen in wind-blown gestures. The land out there is strange. It doesn't just feel empty. It feels ancient. Like it's waiting for something. The sun was low when we lost the signal. Both our phones blinked out. No GPS, no messages, just dead blue screens like someone had pulled the plug on the sky. Mallory tried to laugh it off. "No service," she said, holding her phone up to the windshield. "Guess we're off the grid." But something about her smile didn't reach her eyes. We passed a weather-beaten sign for a primitive campsite about 6 miles off-road. The kind of site with no hookups, no ranger, no one to even know you were there. Normally I would have pushed on, but the van was sputtering, the gauges were lying, and the last gas station we'd seen was over 2 hours behind us. And then there was that look she gave me. Not scared, but tense. Like she didn't want to spend another minute on that road. So I turned. The dirt road was narrow and deeply rutted. Dust exploded around us in clouds, swallowing the world behind. We dropped into low gears and crawled between stretches of wind-warped rock. My knuckles were white on the wheel. Mallory said nothing, her gaze locked on the horizon like she was watching something I couldn't see. When we reached the site, the sun had dipped behind the cliffs. The whole landscape turned bruised and purple. There were 5 cleared spots, each just a fire ring and a flat space for parking. No other vehicles, no people, not even birdsong, just a silence that felt loaded. I killed the engine. We stepped out. The quiet was so heavy I could hear the ticking of the cooling van engine. A breeze shifted through the brush, carrying the dry scent of sage and something else I couldn't place. Metallic, like rust and rain. Mallory moved around the site slowly like she was searching for something. She never said what. Just kept glancing over her shoulder, frowning. I tried to shake it off. Let's just eat, get some sleep, and figure things out in the morning. She nodded, but her eyes were scanning the cliffs. That night, we built a small fire and sat close. The stars came out like they'd been waiting. No light pollution, no planes, just the Milky Way blazing above us in a way that made you feel microscopic and exposed all at once. I was halfway through a can of chili when I heard the first sound. A voice. Faint, carried on the wind, not speaking, humming. I froze. Mallory looked up. Her spoon stopped midair. "You heard that?" I asked. She didn't answer, just stood slowly, turning toward the sound. It came again, a high, trembling hum, almost like a lullaby, but off. Wrong tempo, too slow, too breathy. It was coming from the brush behind the site. No lights, no movement, just that sound, drifting in and out of the wind like someone walking in slow circles. Mallory stepped back. "We should go." "To where?" I whispered. We stared at each other, then at the van. That's when the humming stopped, and the silence that followed was worse. We didn't sleep. We locked the doors and lay there in the van, listening. Every creak of the chassis felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers brushing the windows. At some point, I must have nodded off because I woke to gray light leaking through the curtains. Mallory was already outside, pacing, pale, shaking. "I had a dream," she said without looking at me. "What kind of dream?" She didn't answer right away. Then there were people standing outside the van, just watching, all night. They never moved. I swallowed hard. It was just a dream. "No," she said. "It wasn't." I wanted to leave, immediately, but when I turned the key, the van did nothing. Not a click, not a flicker. Battery was fine, starter was fine. I checked everything I knew to check. Nothing made sense. It was like the van just chose not to work. By mid-morning, the heat was unbearable. The desert pressed in with a silence that felt aggressive. Mallory refused to go back into the shade. Said it made her skin crawl. We started walking, thinking maybe we'd find higher ground and get a signal. That's when we saw it. Down by the dry wash, half covered in dust and broken limbs, was another van. Older than ours. Same make, same model, same color. I stopped cold. "Is that?" "No," Mallory whispered. "It's not ours." We approached slowly. The windows were smashed in, saw it. Rust ran down the doors like blood. Inside, the seats were shredded. Something had lived in there, or died. Bones, maybe animal, maybe not. The license plate was so sun-bleached it was unreadable, but that wasn't what made me sick to my stomach. Pinned to the dashboard with a knife was a Polaroid of a couple, standing beside a yellow van, smiling. The man looked just like me. I stood there, staring at that Polaroid, my legs locked in place. My mind refused to process it. It was too absurd, too exact. The man in the picture had my build, my hairline, even the same damn flannel shirt I'd worn just 2 days ago. And the woman next to him, smiling wide, that was Mallory. Her hands slipped into mine. Cold, trembling, silent. We didn't speak, not as we backed away from the wreck, not as we followed our own tracks back through the dust. Every step felt wrong now, like we were walking inside someone else's memory, or worse, a warning. When we got back to camp, I went straight to the van, tried the key again, and this time the engine turned over on the first try, roared to life like nothing had happened, like it had just been waiting. Mallory stared at the dash. "Get us out of here." We didn't pack properly, just shoved things into drawers, slammed the cabinets shut, tossed everything into the back. She didn't even change out of her sandals. I watched her hands shake as she buckled her seatbelt. We peeled off the site so fast the rear doors rattled. Dust kicked up behind us in a choking cloud. I didn't even stop when the van bottomed out on a rut and something cracked underneath. We just kept going, bouncing over rocks, barely slowing for the bends in the trail. Only when we hit pavement did I realize I was sweating through my shirt, my breath shallow. My hands were still clenched on the wheel like I was afraid it might try to turn itself. "I don't understand," I said finally. "That picture, how could that even?" "I don't think it matters," Mallory said. Her voice was hollow, mechanical. "We're not staying in Utah. Let's get to Arizona. Just keep driving." We made it 3 hours before we had to stop for gas. A tiny outpost town. No name I remember. Just a gas station with a broken ice machine, a general store, and a single diner with flies in the windows. The kind of place that feels like it fell off the map in 1973 and never got back on. I filled up the tank while Mallory went inside to use the bathroom. When I walked in to pay, the guy behind the counter barely looked up. Just kept scratching something onto a notepad with a broken pencil. The only sound in the place was the buzz of the overhead lights and the faint static of a radio that wasn't quite tuned to any station. He looked up, finally, His eyes narrowed. You two just come down from the ridge? Yeah, I said. Escalante area. He stopped writing, just froze like I'd said something foul. You camp up there? Just one night. Why? He stared at me, then turned and walked into the back room without a word. I stood there, awkward, wondering if I'd imagined the whole interaction. A minute later, he came back and set something on the counter. An old laminated flyer, edges frayed, color faded. It showed 3 photos of missing persons. Below that, disappeared after camping near Devil's Throat Ridge. If seen, contact Garfield County Sheriff. One of the photos, a couple, looked almost like that Polaroid. Different clothing. Slightly younger, but unmistakably similar. He tapped the flyer. You get strange dreams tonight. Don't listen to them. Keep driving. Don't stop for anything. I wanted to ask him what the hell that meant, but he just rang me up and turned away. Mallory was sitting outside on the curb when I came out, hunched over, hands clutching her stomach. Her face was pale and drawn like she'd just thrown up or was about to. What's wrong? I crouched down. I saw them again, she whispered, in the mirror. What do you mean? In the bathroom. I looked up and behind me, they were there, just standing, watching me through the window. The same faces. They didn't move. I looked at the building. The bathroom windows were set high, frosted glass. Mal, no one could have. They weren't outside. They were inside the glass. We didn't go to Arizona. We drove until the sky bled orange, then purple, then into the ink black of night. I took turns I didn't recognize, past signs I didn't read. My brain felt full of static. All I knew was I needed to keep the wheels moving. As long as we were driving, we were safe, or safer. At some point, Mallory fell asleep or passed out. I'm not sure. That's when the voices started again. At first, they were just humming, the same too-slow lullaby we'd heard at the campsite. Then words began to form in the noise. Not spoken, not in the air. Inside the van. You left us. We waited. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing there. Just shadows. Mallory stirred beside me, murmured something under her breath. What did you say? I asked. She didn't answer. Then she sat up, rigid, and turned to me with wide, glassy eyes. They're coming, she whispered. They're close now. I pulled off the road. Some gravel turnout surrounded by pines. Killed the engine. The silence rushed in again, thick and absolute. I turned to her. Mallory, look at me. You're okay. We're okay. She blinked slowly. Her breath came in shallow bursts. They know we remember. What does that mean? They can't take you if you don't remember. But you saw it. The van. The photo. Now they're part of you. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know what to believe. My heart pounded like it wanted to crack through my ribs. That's when the knocking started. 3 slow knocks on the rear door, then silence. I turned, my throat clamped tight. The curtains were drawn, nothing visible. Just that low pressure in the air, like a storm about to break. Another knock. Closer. This time on the side panel. Then a voice. Mallory's voice, calling from outside. Babe, can you let me in? I whipped around to look at her, still seated next to me, still pale, still silent. The voice outside repeated, softer now. Please, it's cold out here. I didn't move. Neither did she. We just sat there frozen in the dark. The voice outside shifted. No longer a perfect copy of Mallory's tone, but off, like it was being played back on an old tape. Too slow, a slight hitch at the end of each word. Bob, I'm cold. It's cold out here. It scraped at my nerves like a dull blade. I reached slowly toward the glove box, picked up the flashlight. My fingers trembled, fumbling against the latch. The click of it opening felt like a gunshot in the silence. Then, another voice joined the first, male this time. And this one sounded like me. Open the door. I snapped the flashlight on and Mallory flinched beside me, shielding her face like just been hit with a spotlight. Her pupils were massive, just swallowing her irises. I lowered the beam and aimed it toward the rear of the van. Who's out there? I called, my voice a cracked whisper. No answer. I stepped out of the driver's seat and into the back, careful not to pull the curtain open just yet. Instead, I pressed my ear against the cold metal. Silence. Then a breath. right on the other side, like someone was leaning into the door, waiting for me to speak. "Say something," I whispered. "If you're out there, say something real." More silence. But then I heard the sound of fingers tapping the metal. 5 fingers, slowly dragging down the back panel, like it was petting the van. I jerked back and killed the flashlight, crawled forward into the front seat, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. I didn't even look at Mallory, just turned the key, praying the engine wouldn't hesitate. It didn't, roared to life like it knew what I needed. We peeled off again, gravel spraying behind us. "What did it say?" Mallory asked, still not looking at me. I swallowed. "It sounded like you and me, like copies." "They're not copies," she whispered. "They're leftovers." She didn't elaborate, just sat back, eyes locked on the dark road ahead. We didn't talk for a long time. Miles passed, maybe hours. I lost track. Eventually we saw lights. A real campground with signage, a ranger post, even a few other campers, the kind of place with check-in slips and electric hookups. I almost cried from the relief of it. Civilization. Witnesses. Safety. We parked between 2 big fifth wheels, surrounded by people and lanterns and the occasional sound of a child laughing. It was like stepping back into reality. Like Utah hadn't followed us. We slept. For the first time in days, we actually slept. But when I woke the next morning, something was different. Mallory was already outside, standing barefoot in the gravel, staring into the woods behind the campground. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Her hair was matted, wet like she'd been in the rain, but the sky above was clear and bright. I stepped out. "Mallory?" She didn't turn. I touched her shoulder. She flinched hard, like I'd just jolted her awake. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked. She looked at me slowly, her eyes unfocused. "They were calling again." "Here?" She nodded. "I thought maybe if I followed them, I could make them stop." "No, we're not doing this again. We're getting out of Utah today. Now, before anything else happens." She didn't argue, just walked past me, climbed into the van, and curled into the passenger seat like she couldn't keep herself upright. We pulled out of that campground by noon, made it nearly to the Arizona border before I realized something horrifying. The fuel gauge hadn't moved. We'd been driving for hours, and the needle hadn't budged. I tapped the glass, even smacked the dash once, hoping it was a mechanical failure. But the mileage tracker had reset too, like we just started the van this morning. And the map? The little blue GPS dot kept circling back, always drifting north, back toward Devil's Throat Ridge. I stopped the van, parked it on the shoulder of some unmarked road where the scrub grass reached up past the tires. I held the phone in my hands, shaking. "Look," I said, "we've been here before. This isn't just deja vu. It's looping. It's like we're being pulled back." Mallory stared at the screen for a long time, then slowly raised her gaze to meet mine. "We left something behind," she said. "No." I said, "No, I'm not doing that. We didn't forget anything. We're not going back." She closed her eyes. "Then we'll never leave." Her words settled into the cabin like dust, unshakable, permanent. We sat there for what felt like hours, listening to the silence, watching the sky change. Finally, I turned the van around, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't take another mile of pretending we were free when we weren't. We drove north, back to the ridge, back into the silence. The road leading back to Devil's Throat Ridge didn't look the same. I mean, it was technically the same path, same cracked highway lines, same rust-colored desert stretching out on either side like scorched parchment. But something had shifted, not just in the land, but in the way it received us. It was too quiet now. No birds, no wind, no rustle of dry sage or the distant hum of tires from other travelers. Just the rhythmic crunch of our own van over brittle gravel and the dull clinking of something in the back of the cabin, a spoon maybe, swaying slightly against the sink. Mallory didn't speak the whole way there. Her body was in the passenger seat, but something about her had gone inward, as if she was already halfway buried in whatever place we were driving toward. I didn't know what we were returning for. I didn't even believe in half the things we'd experienced. But I did believe in momentum. and in the simple fact that the road, no matter where we turned, seemed to be folding itself back on us like a closing hand. We weren't going forward anymore. We were being drawn in. The ridge came into view just before dusk. That crooked canyon split in the rock, barely visible from the road unless you already knew where to look. Mallory raised one arm and pointed toward a narrow pull-off I'd missed the first time. Turn there. Her voice was flat, but certain. I didn't argue. We parked at the edge of the overlook, tires inches from the crumbling ledge. I killed the engine, and the silence that replaced it was somehow louder than the motor had been. Like the air was waiting. We stepped out, and the moment our feet hit the dust, I felt it again, that pressure, like standing in a room full of people who had all just stopped talking, that sense that you were being observed by something you couldn't name. Mallory led the way. She walked like she already knew the trail. We didn't talk as we descended into the gash in the earth. The canyon swallowed us slowly, cliffs tightening in until the sky became a strip of bruised light above. The air cooled, not with the evening, but unnaturally. Like something deep in the rock was pulling the heat out of the air around us, replacing it with something older, wetter, like breathing inside a lung that wasn't yours. And that's when we heard them again. The voices. But this time, they didn't call from a distance. They whispered from inches away, as if they were walking beside us, pacing our stride, brushing invisible hands against the backs of our arms. They weren't imitating anyone this time. They didn't need to. They already knew us. Why did you leave? You heard us. You promised you'd come back. You're here now, so stay. I gritted my teeth. I knew they weren't real, or at least not alive. But they were clever. They didn't shout. They didn't scream. They implanted. Their words settled in like doubt, like memory, like guilt. They found cracks and crawled in. Mallory suddenly stopped. She turned and faced the rock wall to her left, placed one hand against it like it was a door. Her lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. Mal? I stepped closer. What are you doing? I know where it is now, she said. Where what is? The hole. I started to respond, but then her hand pushed through the rock. No, not through it. There was a space there, a sliver, so narrow it looked like a crack unless you were right up against it. But she stepped into it, sideways, like she was being absorbed by the canyon wall, and vanished. Mallory! I rushed forward. The crack was real. Narrow as a coffin, but just wide enough to pass through if I'd turned sideways and squeezed. So I followed her. The space beyond was pitch black. I stretched my hands out on either side, palms scraping rough sandstone. The air here was damp, cold, and it breathed. I could hear the slow, wet inhale of something enormous in the dark. I kept going, foot by foot, deeper, until the walls fell away and I stumbled forward into a cavern. And there she was, standing at the edge of a stone basin filled with water so black it looked like a window into space. She turned as I entered, and the look in her eyes stopped me cold. She wasn't afraid. She was resigned. They live here, she said quietly, in the dark between places, in the echo of everything we try to forget. I shook my head. No, we're leaving, right now. You can't leave a place you're still carrying inside you. I stepped forward and grabbed her arm. That's when I heard the water move. Just a ripple at first, then a sound like dozens of fingernails tapping glass. I turned to face the pool. Shapes moved beneath the surface. Faces, ours. But not quite. Like they were built from memory, not flesh. Imperfect copies made by something that had only listened. The voice came again, from all directions at once. You drove into our mouth. You asked for the scenic route. Mallory stepped back, her body trembling now, her defiance cracking. I didn't mean to, she whispered. We didn't know. But the voice didn't care. Or maybe it did. Maybe that was the point. Then leave behind what you took. I felt something shift in my chest then. A memory, a question. What had we taken? What were we carrying with us that belonged to this place? And then I realized it wasn't an object. It was the fear, the silence, the listening. It had infected us, changed the way we moved, how we breathed, what we dreamed. It had followed us not because it needed us, but because we had already given it a home. Inside. I looked at Mallory, and she looked back, and in that moment, we both knew what we had to do. We stepped forward, together, and screamed, loud, raw. Every ounce of fear and grief and horror that had taken root in us, we let it fly from our mouths like smoke from a fire. The cavern shook. The pool trembled. And the voices, for the first time, recoiled. The stone walls of the cavern didn't echo our screams the way you'd expect. They swallowed them. The sound didn't bounce or return. It vanished, as if something unseen drank it straight from the air. And for the first time since we turned off the scenic route, we could feel the silence reacting. Not passive anymore. Agitated, threatened. The water in the basin churned like something huge was waking beneath it. Mallory gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin hard enough to draw blood. "They're coming up," she whispered. "I think we woke them." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "We drew a line. They need our silence, our shame. We broke that." But still, we backed away, because even the bravest logic shrinks when you see something breach the surface of that impossible pool. It wasn't a shape at first, not one you could name. Just movement. Darkness that didn't reflect light, but bent it, like the water was folding around a void. And then faces began to rise again. Ours, not mirrors. Copies. Mallory and I stood there, staring down into warped reflections of ourselves that blinked in opposite rhythm, mouths moving silently but out of sync with anything we'd ever said. I could see it clearly now, how long they'd been practicing us, echoing us, building from memory, from fear, from every stray word and unspoken grief we'd ever let out into the night air. They weren't us, but they were close, too close. "Leave that part behind," the voices hissed. "You don't need it anymore. We'll carry it now." I wanted to move, to run, but something in their tone froze me. Not a threat, an invitation. It was so seductive, the idea that someone, something, would take your pain and wear it for you, that you could walk away lighter, free. And I saw Mallory lean forward just a little, her face slack. "No," I said. "Don't listen. They want your weight. They'll wear your grief until you forget who you ever were without it." She blinked, her eyes wet, and stepped back. The surface of the water rippled again, harder now. The cavern shook. A low moan rolled through the rock like thunder in a throat. And then the stone beneath our feet cracked. A thin fracture split between us and the basin. The air rushed past, sucked downward into whatever lay beneath. "We have to go. Now." I grabbed Mallory's hand, and together we turned and ran. Back through the narrow crack in the wall. Back toward the twisting path of sandstone and shallow turns. The voices chased us, no longer whispering. "You chose this. You found us. You belong here." The canyon twisted beneath our feet, but somehow our memories of the way in were still intact. Whether that was luck or something darker, I don't know. But we found the path back up. The dying light from above grew wider, then broader, until finally we burst out of the crevice and into the cooling desert air. I didn't realize I was still holding Mallory's hand until we reached the van. I let go. My hand was shaking. We both turned to look back at the ridge, but it was gone. Or no, not gone. Different. The crack in the rock was sealed, seamless, as if it had never opened in the first place. "I don't understand," Mallory said, her voice small. "Why us?" I didn't have an answer. But I looked at her, the pale, dusty outline of her face in the twilight, and I realized something important. We'd never really asked that question before. Not when we chose the detour. Not when we stayed despite the signs. Not even when the voices began. We'd been looking for something strange. Something to shake us loose. That's what the open road had always promised. The mystery of escape. The thrill of getting off the map. But no one tells you what lives off the map. No one warns you what kinds of hungry memories are waiting in the quiet places, memories that see you when you drive by and call out in a voice that sounds just like yours. We didn't speak on the drive back, not until the ridgeline vanished from the rearview mirror and the radio crackled to life again with static and weak FM stations. Only then did I let myself believe we were back in the world, that we might have escaped. but part of me still wondered if something had come with us. Not a ghost, not a monster, just a shadow. Something tucked into the folds of our voices, the empty corners of our thoughts. Something patient, something that could wait. We drove for hours that night without a single stop. Not for gas, not for food, not even to stretch our legs. The van felt safe only so long as it moved, as long as we kept driving away from whatever had tried to unmake us in that desert. But as the dawn rose, soft and pink against the cliffs, I realized something that chilled me worse than the voices ever could. I couldn't remember what town we were headed toward. I stared at the GPS, expecting the comforting blue dot and route line to reappear, but the screen was blank. Not even a searching for signal message, just gray. Dead. I asked Mallory if she remembered the name of the town we picked when we planned the route back. She shook her head slowly. I thought you picked it. A sick silence filled the van. This wasn't the kind of forgetfulness that comes from exhaustion. It was sharper, more surgical, like something had cut the memory clean out of our minds. "We need to stop," Mallory said, her voice suddenly dry. "Just for a bit, pull over somewhere." So we did, just outside a forgotten rest stop off a 2-lane road that curved along a dried-out wash. A concrete picnic table sat cracked and sun-bleached under a sagging tree. The air was still, oppressive, too warm for the morning. Mallory went to wash her face at the spigot. I stayed by the van. That's when I noticed it. Our voices, not speaking, just echoing. Somewhere in the stillness, behind the windless heat, I heard us. Laughing, arguing, whispering. Not exactly like we had before, but close enough. Like someone trying to imitate our past. At first, I thought I was losing it. Maybe the fear, the adrenaline, the heat. Maybe it had cracked something inside my head. But then Mallory came back, soaking wet, shaking. "Did you say something just now?" she asked. "No." Her jaw clenched. "Because I heard you. You said you were sorry, that it was your fault." I hadn't said a word. She backed away from me, her eyes full of panic. And then she caught herself, clenched her fists, closed her eyes, breathed. "They're still with us, aren't they?" "They don't need the canyon," I said, barely whispering. "They just need the road." And it made sense in the worst possible way. All those voices out there, they weren't bound to a single place. They were part of the open land, the places where names fade, where roads don't quite match the maps anymore. Places made for silence and secrets. They followed the broken, wandering, and lost. People like us. I climbed into the driver's seat again, and Mallory got in without a word. We didn't know where we were driving. We just had to drive. Because if we stopped too long, we'd hear ourselves, we'd answer back. We passed through what looked like a ghost town. No name, no signage, just rusted trailers and boarded up stores. We didn't stop. I wouldn't have stopped even if the tank ran dry. I would have driven on fumes just to keep moving. And then, without warning, the radio clicked on. Not static this time. It was us. I heard my voice, clearly. Calm, confident, telling Mallory we should keep heading south, that we'd find a safe spot soon. But I hadn't spoken. Mallory turned to me, eyes wide. "That's not you," she said. "But it knows what we're doing." And then her voice came through the speakers, whispering. "You were right to leave the canyon, but wrong to think it ended there." I hit the power button on the dash. The radio wouldn't turn off. Mallory reached up and yanked the whole faceplate off the stereo. Silence for maybe 5 seconds. Then the engine stuttered. The headlights flickered. And the van slowed down, all on its own. My foot was still on the gas. The pedal didn't matter. Mallory was staring at the windshield. "There's something in the road," she said. I looked. Nothing. Just open pavement. And yet, my hands began to turn the wheel. I wasn't controlling them. My brain was screaming to resist, but my muscles didn't respond. Something was riding us, like a memory co-piloting the body. And then Mallory shouted, "Stop! Now!" The illusion snapped. The wheel wrenched free in my hands, and I slammed on the brakes. The van screeched to a stop at the edge of a ravine. No road ahead, just cracked cliffside. If we'd gone another 10 feet, we would have driven straight off the edge. I killed the engine, threw open the door. collapsed to my knees in the dirt, and vomited. We weren't being haunted, we were being rewritten. Whatever had found us in that canyon wasn't just following anymore. It was trying us on. Every road we took gave it more shape, more dialogue to pull from. And the worst part, it felt easier and easier to go along with it. That was the seduction. That was the pull of the open road twisted sideways, a freedom that devours your identity and leaves behind only echoes. We sat in the van for hours after that. Engine off, doors locked, windows cracked just enough to keep us from suffocating. The canyon heat had followed us here, but it was the silence that pressed hardest on my chest. Mallory wouldn't look at me. She held her knees to her chest and rocked like a child who'd seen something too big to process. I was afraid to speak, afraid to hear my own words in the radio or in the dark outside the glass, afraid that if I opened my mouth, it wouldn't be me who answered. When the sun finally dipped behind the cliffs, Mallory stirred. Her voice was hoarse. "If we keep running, it'll just keep chasing." I nodded. My throat was too raw to argue. She wiped her eyes and looked out across the darkening valley. "Maybe it's not even chasing. Maybe it's waiting for us to be too tired to resist." That thought sank into my stomach like lead. I looked around the dash, my eyes drifting to the GPS, still lifeless. The stereo, still ripped out. Everything that should have given us direction was dead, useless. We had only our instincts left, and they were battered things. "Then what?" I asked finally. "We just let it take us?" She shook her head slowly. "No, but we can't pretend it isn't there anymore." A long silence passed. I knew she was right, but I couldn't imagine how to face something like this. It wasn't a person you could fight. It wasn't an animal you could run from. It was like the land itself, patient, indifferent, endless. She unbuckled her seatbelt and climbed out. I followed, legs stiff, every bone in my body aching. The air smelled of dust and something stranger, like burnt paper. I felt it before I heard it. A pressure at the base of my skull, a thrum in my teeth. Then, a voice behind me. My own voice. "You can come back. You can be part of something that doesn't end." I turned so fast I nearly fell. There was nothing there. Mallory was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Did you hear?" I heard it. The voice came again, closer. "You don't have to keep trying to remember. We can remember for you." My jaw clenched so tight I felt my molars creak. I tried to shout, but what came out wasn't my words. "I'm tired." My mouth said in a low, patient tone, "I want to come home." Mallory grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "Fight it!" I tried. I swear I tried. But my mouth was still moving, the voice still spilling out, smooth as oil. "Let go of all that pain. Let go of the road. You were never meant to leave the canyon." The pressure in my skull pulsed harder. My vision blurred. I forced out a single word in my own voice. "No." And for an instant, the pressure eased. Mallory pulled me away from the van. We stumbled across the dirt lot to the broken picnic table. I collapsed onto the bench, shaking so violently my teeth rattled. Mallory cupped my face in her hands. "This is how it gets you," she whispered. "It makes you too tired to care if you lose yourself." I nodded, fighting the fog creeping in around the edges of my mind. Somewhere deep in the night, the voices began again. Not whispering now, but singing. Our own voices, woven together in an eerie harmony. "The road is the end. The road is the beginning. You belong to it." Mallory covered her ears and screamed, but I knew it wouldn't help. The voices weren't just around us anymore. They were inside. I closed my eyes. I pictured that canyon. How it felt to stand on the rim and feel the earth pulling you in, not with gravity, but with something deeper. Something ancient that recognized the soft animal part of you that would always submit, if only it could be convinced you were alone. I opened my eyes, and for the first time I spoke to it directly. "You're not the road," I said hoarsely. "You're just what's left behind when people stop being themselves." The singing faltered. Mallory's breath hitched. I stood. I could feel it. The thing, pushing at my mind, probing for weakness. But something in me had snapped into place, hard and unyielding. "I'm not giving you anything," I whispered. "I'm not yours." The air around us seemed to grow thicker. The heat spiked, waves shimmering off the asphalt, Mallory clung to my hand, knuckles white. Then silence. Utter, perfect silence. I thought for a moment I'd gone deaf, but when Mallory spoke in her real voice, I heard her. Is it gone? I didn't know, but I knew we'd done something. Drawn a line in the dust it couldn't cross without our surrender. I helped her back to the van. My hands were steady now. We climbed inside, and for the first time since we left that canyon, I didn't feel the sense of something riding in the back seat. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. The GPS screen flickered. The road ahead glowed in the headlights, empty, clean, just a road again. Mallory exhaled a ragged sob. I looked at her, feeling something like hope crack through the fear. We keep going, I said quietly, but this time we don't let it name us. She nodded. And as I eased the van back onto the highway, I realized something I hadn't dared believe. Even out here, in the places where no one's watching, you can choose who you are, even if it tries to take your voice. The road unspooled ahead of us in silence. There was no music, no radio, no GPS pinging every half mile, just the humming of the tires on asphalt and the occasional flick of a high desert breeze against the mirrors. We drove for hours that way, through the last stretch of Utah's winding nothing, past fields of petrified wood and towns that looked like they'd already been abandoned by time. Mallory didn't speak much. Neither did I. We were conserving something, not just our voices, but whatever small piece of ourselves had remained untouched in that canyon. Every once in a while, a shadow would flinch across the road and we'd both tense. That paranoia doesn't go away easily. That feeling that you've been followed out of a place where something else still lingers. But the voices didn't return. Not out loud. Not in the way that made my throat move without my permission. What lingered now was more subtle, like something echoing just below hearing. A question that never fully formed. A pressure behind the eyes when the road curved back towards something familiar. We pulled into a little RV park on the edge of Nevada just after 3 a.m. Nothing fancy, just a dirt lot with hookups, a flickering bathroom light, and a few fifth wheels lined up like sleeping whales under a dusty sky. We parked at the far end under a dying cottonwood tree. The branches reached over us like crooked fingers. But for the first time in days, I didn't feel threatened by the land. I felt tired. The kind of tired that doesn't just live in your muscles, but in your soul. Mallory made a pot of coffee. We didn't drink it. Just let the smell fill the cabin while we sat on the floor, back against the cupboards, knees drawn up to our chests like kids hiding from monsters. Eventually, she asked me, "Do you think it's gone? For good?" I thought about it. About the canyon. About the voices using our own memories, our own stories like bait. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think things like that ever really go away." She nodded slowly. "Then what do we do now?" I looked out through the front windshield. Beyond the park office, beyond the highway, the land stretched open and endless. "I think we keep going," I said, "but not to escape, to remember who we are when something tries to rewrite us." Mallory reached over and squeezed my hand. It was small, but it meant something. We slept for a while that morning, not deeply. The kind of half-sleep where the body rests but the mind still stands guard. When I woke, the sunlight was warm across my face, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like an interrogation. We made breakfast. We didn't talk about the canyon, but we both understood it was still with us. Not haunting, exactly, but carved into the foundation of who we now were. And that's the truth of this kind of fear. It doesn't always look like monsters in the trees or glowing eyes in the dark. Sometimes it's the idea that you could disappear without anyone noticing, that you could lose yourself in the quiet, in the vastness of a place too old and too deep to care. Sometimes it's the voice inside that doesn't sound like you anymore. And the victory, the real survival, is in remembering your name when something else tries to speak it for you. A few days later, we crossed into California. We didn't tell the full story to anyone, not right away, but we watched how other campers looked at the edges of the trees, watched how long they paused before they answered a simple question. Because once you've seen it, once you've heard it, you know how to spot the ones who've been too close to the same edge. We met a couple from Flagstaff who said they'd taken the back route through the Red Rocks last spring. They didn't say much more, but the way the woman flinched when the wind knocked a chair over told me she'd heard something too. The thing about RV life, the real full-time life, is that you learn to read silence better than most. You learn to listen, not just to the road, but to each other. And sometimes in those long stretches of nothing where the land feels like it could swallow you whole, you learn what parts of yourself you're willing to lose and which ones you'd fight to the end to keep. We still take the scenic route, still wander back roads and camp in places that don't show up on apps, but we listen more now, to each other, to ourselves, to the stillness before a storm. And if something ever calls to us again, using our own voices, our own fears, we'll know how to answer. Not with surrender, but with truth, with memory, with fire. Because the road doesn't belong to what haunts it. It belongs to the ones who refuse to forget who they are, even in the silence, even in the canyon, even when the voices follow. I should have trusted the silence, not the desert silence, the kind you hear about in poetry and postcards, the kind that holds you like a blanket. No, I'm talking about that other silence, the one that stretches too long, the kind that grows in your gut when something isn't right, when the wind stops, when the birds stop, when your instincts beg you to listen, but your mind just keeps driving forward. I felt that silence in my chest before we ever saw the station, before the gas needle dipped, before the clouds came down low over the Mojave like a lid closing on a box. We were already deep into the trip when it started. My name's Chris, 34, photographer, weekend nomad. My girlfriend Mia and I had been on the road for 5 days already, heading south through California, trailing the edges of forgotten highways in my 91 Volkswagen Westphalia. We'd hit the redwoods, we'd dipped through Big Sur, and we were planning to cut across the Mojave on our way to camp out near Joshua Tree. She loved the desert, said it reminded her of something ancient and clean. But me, I grew up in Oregon. Trees, fog, rain. The open land always felt too exposed, like I didn't belong there. But I loved her. And sometimes you go into the dust for someone you care about, even when your gut says you shouldn't. We'd left early that morning from a dispersed camping spot just west of Barstow, and by noon we were cruising through a cracked 2-lane highway flanked by sunburned hills and nothing else. No other cars. No signs of life. Just a sun that didn't blink and a road that didn't end. I remember glancing at the gas gauge and realizing the needle was lower than I thought it should be. We'd last filled up the night before, but something was off. Maybe the gauge was sticking, maybe we were burning more fuel with the AC on full blast, but we were dropping into E fast. I clicked off the air, cracked the windows, and the desert air poured in, dry as bone, thick with the scent of minerals and something faintly sweet. Almost like honeysuckle, but not natural. "There's got to be a gas station soon," I muttered, mostly to myself. Mia looked up from her book and scanned the road. "We haven't seen anything for hours. Want me to check the map?" I handed her my phone, but there was no signal, not a single bar. "Dead zone," she said. "Figures." So we kept driving, slow, conserving fuel, watching the temperature climb. It was over 100 now, and heat waves shimmered across the pavement like oil slicks. Then we saw it. A faded wooden sign, warped from sun, barely legible. I remember we looked at each other, like two people who just spotted land after being lost at sea. The road curved left, and up ahead a dirt turnoff forked off the pavement, leading to a low rise in the landscape. Beyond that, just sky. And beyond that, we couldn't see. But we turned anyway, because we needed gas, and we were in the middle of nowhere. The path was rough, more like an old mining road than anything maintained. Our van rattled and shuddered over potholes and sand pits, kicking up clouds of dust that hung behind us like smoke trails. There were no other cars, no tire marks, No signs that anyone else had used this road in a long, long time. After about a mile and a half, the gas station came into view. At first, it didn't even register as real. A lone, single-story building, beige and peeling, with a rusted tin roof and two old-fashioned gas pumps out front. The kind with dials instead of digital numbers. The whole place looked like it hadn't seen business in years. But the pumps, they weren't covered in cobwebs or chained off. One had a faded sign that read, "Regular unleaded, $3.99. We pulled in slow. I cut the engine and stepped out. The second my boots hit the dirt, I felt it. That silence again. Not just quiet. Wrong. There were no insects buzzing, no wind, no sound at all. Even the ticking of the van's engine cooling down felt like a hammer strike in that stillness. Mia stepped out behind me, fanning herself with a hand. "Looks abandoned," she said, eyeing the station. I walked up to the pump, ran my hand over the cracked plastic. No card reader, just a nozzle and a big metal button. "You think it still works?" she asked. I didn't answer. I didn't know. But the gauge in the van was on empty now, and we didn't have many choices. I hit the button. There was a dull clunk from somewhere inside the pump, and then miraculously, the dial clicked over to 0. I squeezed the handle. Fuel started flowing. It smelled strange, like gas, but with something chemical. Faint, but wrong. I waved a hand in front of my face, trying to ignore it. Mia wandered toward the building, peeking through the dusty windows. "There's someone inside," she called out. "Or was. There's a chair by the counter. Still warm." "Still warm?" I asked, brow furrowed. She nodded, coming back over. "Yeah, like someone was just sitting there." We looked around again, still no sound, no movement, not even a breeze. The pump stopped with a clunk. I holstered the nozzle and screwed the cap on. Then we heard it, a sound like humming. Low, rhythmic, almost like a voice, but too deep to be human. It seemed to be coming from behind the station, beyond a low fence made of weathered wood and rusted wire. Beyond that was open desert, flat and empty, except for a strange angular structure about 100 yards out. It looked like an old billboard frame, but the panels were missing, just the skeletal metal bones of it rising from the sand. Mia tilted her head. "Do you hear that?" "Yeah," I said. "Let's go." We climbed back into the van, and I turned the key. Nothing. No crank, no click, no dash lights. Just dead. I turned the key again. Still nothing. Mia's face was pale now. It was fine 2 minutes ago. I popped the hood and stepped outside. Checked the battery. Terminals were tight, no corrosion. The connections were fine. I got back in, tried again. Nothing. Then, from the back of the station, movement. A figure. Just for a second. Too tall, too thin. Gone before I could blink. "Someone's back there," I whispered. But Mia shook her head. I didn't see anything. I did. Then the humming returned. Louder this time. Pulsing like a heartbeat through the air. I stepped out of the van again, and the moment my foot hit the ground, the temperature dropped. Not a little. Not like a breeze. Like someone opened a freezer door in the middle of the desert. I could see my breath. Behind the station, that structure, it began to shimmer. The air around it rippling like heat waves, but this time in reverse. Cold distortion, like underwater light bending around something enormous and invisible. That was when I knew we'd made a mistake. We weren't supposed to be here. And we weren't alone. I don't remember deciding to walk toward the structure. I just remember my legs moving. Slow at first, like I was being pulled by a thread I couldn't see. It was like gravity had changed directions, like the center of it wasn't the earth anymore, but that thing behind the station. I took 3 steps before Mia grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" Her voice was sharp now, her hand was ice cold. I shook my head, trying to break free of whatever trance I'd slipped into. "I don't know. Did you feel that cold?" She nodded, staring at the ground behind the station. "It's coming from there." I turned back toward the metal structure. Still distant. Still shimmering. It looked taller now, or maybe I was just seeing it more clearly. From that angle, it wasn't just a billboard skeleton. It had angles. Impossible ones. Shapes that bent space in a way my brain couldn't settle on. The longer I looked, the more it felt like it was turning inside out. And then the humming stopped. Like a switch had been flipped. The silence was back, thick and full of pressure, like the sky was about to collapse. Then, knock. A single deliberate knock, right on the back of the van. I whipped around. No one. Nothing but the cracked earth and that weather-beaten fence. Knock. Again. This time on the driver's window. Mia screamed. I lunged forward and threw open the door. Nothing there. Just a smudge on the glass. Like a handprint. But wrong. Too long. Too thin. 4 fingers. We scrambled inside and locked the doors, hearts pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. I don't understand. What the hell is this place? Mia whispered. I didn't answer, because I was staring at the gas pump. The dial was spinning, fast, even though I'd already finished fueling. It wasn't ticking up in price or volume, it was just spinning. Then it stopped, abruptly, at exactly 00 node. Mia was crying now, quietly. Not sobs, more like that tight, trembling breath people make when they're trying not to fall apart. I swear the chair inside was warm, she said. I swear it was warm. We sat in the van for what felt like 10 minutes, watching the shadows get longer outside. The air was still freezing, like we were parked beside a walk-in freezer in the middle of July. Then the humming started again, this time from inside the building. I turned toward it and the interior lights flicked on. Fluorescent, sickly green, flickering, and someone was standing behind the counter. No movement, no face, just a silhouette. I turned the key again, begged. Nothing, not even a click. Mia whispered, "We have to leave, even on foot." That was the worst part, I agreed. I'd never willingly left the van before. That Westphalia had carried me through rainstorms, mountain passes, desert nights. I trusted it more than I trusted most people. It was our home, our shield. But something here didn't care what we trusted. We got out, backpacks thrown over our shoulders, water bottles, a flashlight, a single buck knife, and we started walking. We didn't go toward the main road. Somehow, I didn't think it was there anymore. We walked in the opposite direction, across the flat desert plain that stretched behind the station, hoping we'd hit a trail, a highway, anything. But as soon as we crossed the old fence line, the air changed. Sound dropped again, like we passed through an invisible curtain. And that's when we heard the voices. Faint at first, like radio static, whispering just beneath comprehension, then clearer. "Where are you going?" We froze. The voice was a man's, calm, gentle even, but wrong. Off-tempo, like a record played at the wrong speed. Too slow. "I don't think you want to leave," it said again. I looked back at the station, nothing there. And then Mia grabbed my arm and pointed. A figure, standing near the billboard structure. It hadn't been there before. It was facing us. Too far to see a face, but tall. Inhumanly tall. Wearing what looked like coveralls, but they shimmered like oil on water. Its head was tilted slightly, like it was studying us. Mia took a step back. I grabbed her hand and whispered, "Run." We bolted. Full sprint across cracked sand and scattered brush. The wind picked up, harsh and icy, like it was being blown straight from some high-altitude place. The kind of cold that cuts through your clothes, through your skin. The voices followed us, now multiple. Whispers in different tones, rising and overlapping. "Don't go. You'll get lost. You're already lost. Let us help you." I turned the flashlight behind us, sweeping. Nothing. Then, bam, a shape rushed past us, a blur of movement to our left. Too fast. We stopped, breathless, panicking. I turned in circles, scanning the horizon. We weren't alone. We were surrounded. The flashlight caught something, a reflection, a metal object half buried in the sand. I moved toward it, a license plate, rusted, bent, half covered, California plate. Letters barely visible, and then another and another. 10 feet farther, an entire door, half a car, stripped and sunk into the ground like it had melted into the desert. Mia pointed with a trembling hand. To the right, more debris. A backpack, a sneaker, a camera lens. Not scattered by accident, arranged, like offerings, like warnings. I felt my stomach turn. This place didn't just trap people. It kept them. We had to move. We kept walking, running until our lungs screamed and our legs turned to rubber. Finally, we stumbled over a small ridge and saw something below. Lights, real lights. A building. Modern. A travel plaza, gas, convenience store, fast food, civilization. We scrambled down the slope like desperate animals, bloodied from cactus thorns and sunburned skin. We reached the edge of the lot and fell to our knees on the hot blacktop, gasping, crying, laughing. We were safe. At least, we thought we were. But when I turned to look back, there was no ridge, no path, no desert, just a flat expanse of night, like the landscape had rewritten itself. And I swear, off in the distance, far beyond the lights, I still heard the humming. We didn't say anything for a while, just sat there on the asphalt like survivors pulled from a shipwreck. I could feel the heat of the blacktop through my jeans, could hear the hum of vending machines from the building nearby. It was all too ordinary, blindingly so, like the world had snapped back into focus too fast and our minds couldn't keep up. Eventually, a woman in a red polo came out from the store. Her name tag said Carrie. She asked if we were okay. Mia answered, voice hoarse. We just got lost. In the desert. Carrie didn't press, just nodded, handed us each a bottle of water, and told us to come inside when we were ready. Inside, everything felt sterile, too bright, too clean, like walking into a hospital after surviving a car crash. That whiplash between chaos and order. I used the restroom to wash my face. In the mirror, I looked off. My eyes were too wide, lips pale. There was a smear of dirt down one side of my cheek that looked almost like a handprint, though I didn't remember being touched. When I wiped it away, my skin underneath looked lighter, like the pigment had been leached out. Mia bought us both sandwiches and asked if I wanted to try calling someone. I nodded, but something made me hesitate. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 3:07 a.m. That couldn't be right. It had been nearly sunset when we first pulled up to that gas station. We'd spent, maybe an hour total? 2 at most, but more than 8 hours had passed. I stared at the screen, then tried to pull up a map. Nothing. The signal was dead. We asked Carrie where exactly we were. She looked confused. You're just outside Indio, she said, right off the I-10. Mia and I looked at each other. Indio was nowhere near where we'd been, at least 2 hours south of our route. We hadn't driven, we'd walked. We should have still been in the Mojave, but the desert doesn't care about should. We sat in the booth for another hour, nursing terrible coffee, saying nothing. Then we walked out into the parking lot, and there it was. The van. Parked right next to the building like it had been there the whole time. I swear to you, we never brought it here. We left it behind, locked, abandoned. But now it sat there, clean, intact, no scratches or dust. Engine cold like it hadn't run in days. Mia's voice cracked. No, no, no. I checked the keys, still in my pocket. I approached slowly, like it might vanish if I moved too fast. Opened the door. The inside smelled like lavender, our air freshener. Nothing out of place, except for one thing, the gas gauge. Full. I'd only put in half a tank. I turned the ignition. It started on the first try. We didn't talk much on the way out of town. The silence between us wasn't angry. It was protective. Like, if we spoke about what happened, it might hear us, might find us again. A few hours later, we crossed into Arizona. Sunlight bathed the landscape in warm orange. But it didn't make me feel safe, because the humming hadn't stopped. I could still hear it, not from outside the van, from inside. Like it had come back with us, like it never needed the gas station. That night, we stopped at a small campground outside Flagstaff. Nothing fancy, just a couple of other vans and some hikers with tents. We didn't light a fire, just sat in the dark and listened to the wind in the trees. Mia finally broke the silence. Do you think it's following us? I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know how to say what I felt. I didn't think it was following us. I thought we were still there, that the road we drove out on didn't lead us away, it led us deeper in. Like the real world was just a painted backdrop and we'd already stepped behind it. That night, I dreamed of the billboard again, only this time I could read the sign. It didn't advertise gas or food, it just said one word, stay. The letters were made of light, shifting, breathing. I woke up with a nosebleed, and on the dashboard, a receipt from that gas station, time-stamped 2 hours after we'd walked away from it, paid in full by someone named Operator. No address, no card number, just that name. We didn't stay another night. We drove south, east, anywhere. We didn't stop except for gas and only at well-lit stations with other people and real maps. But it didn't matter, because the radio kept cutting out. Songs would skip mid-chorus or twist into static just long enough to whisper something that didn't belong. Sometimes it said our names. Sometimes it just laughed. Other nights, we'd park in safe campgrounds, national parks, well-trafficked places. And still, when we woke up, the van would be dusty, like it had been driven through a different desert, one we didn't remember. We tried telling people, a ranger in Utah, a gas station attendant in Colorado, but the looks they gave us, sympathetic, pitying, like they'd heard similar things before, like they knew something we didn't. One old man at a campground near Moab pulled me aside while Mia slept. He had eyes that looked hollow from the inside out. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said. I didn't answer. He nodded anyway. "It doesn't want much," he whispered, "just to be remembered." I asked him what it was. He just smiled and walked away, left behind a Polaroid face down on the picnic table. It showed a gas station, desert around it, billboard glowing behind, same station, only older, burnt around the edges, and at the bottom, in blue pen, 1979, we never left. After that night in Moab, I stopped asking questions out loud. It wasn't surrender. It was survival. We kept moving, crossing state lines like fugitives, only we didn't know what we were running from or if it was behind us at all. Some days it felt closer. Other days it felt like it had dissolved into our skin and wasn't chasing us anymore, because it didn't have to. Something changed in Mia. She started waking up before sunrise, staring out the van windows for long stretches. Not scared, just watchful, like she was waiting for something to catch up. Her sketchbook, once full of trees and canyons, became filled with one recurring image: the gas station. Different angles, different skies, but always the same building, that same flickering neon sign, the glowing billboard behind it, just out of frame. One page showed it half buried in sand, another with the windows boarded shut, a third with no doors at all, just a long black hallway where the entrance should have been. She never explained them, and I didn't ask, because deep down I understood. It wasn't about the gas station anymore. It was about what it represented. There are places in this country that exist between coordinates, not haunted, not cursed, just forgotten by time, unnoticed by maps, untouched by laws of logic. And if you wander too long, if you're too open to the wrong kind of silence, it finds you. Not to kill you. That'd be too easy. It rewrites you. Piece by piece. I tried going back once, not to the gas station, we never found it again, but to the first turnoff where it had begun. Mia stayed behind in a coffee shop in Barstow. She didn't say why. I think she knew I needed to do it alone. I took the van up the 247, then west onto a dirt road I swore I remembered. The air was dry and sharp. The sun hung over the horizon like it was waiting for permission to set. I drove for an hour, then two. Nothing. No gas station, no mirage, no false billboard, just dust, cactus, and the kind of heat that hums in your teeth. I pulled over when the road thinned out and got out of the van, stood still, waited, and then I heard it. Not a hum, not a voice, just the faintest sound of a payphone ringing, one long tone, like a heartbeat stretched into sound. It came from nowhere. I turned slowly, scanning the desert, and there it was. Not the station, not the building, just the sign, the billboard, alone in the sand, no poles, no wires, no power source, just standing there, maybe 30 yards away. This time, the text was different. It read, "You looked," and then, underneath, in flickering letters, "Welcome back." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just got back in the van and drove, didn't look back, didn't breathe until I reached the main road again. When I got back to the coffee shop, Mia looked up from her sketchbook and nodded once. No surprise. No shock. "I felt it," she said. "Same moment you saw it. I felt it. Blink." We never talked about going back after that, because there was no going back. And truthfully, I don't think it ever left us. Not fully. We still live on the road, still in the van, still wandering from campground to campground. Some nights we sleep without issue. Other nights, we wake up parked in a different place than where we went to sleep. Some mornings, we find receipts in the glove box we don't remember signing. Others, we hear music playing on the radio we didn't turn on. But we've made peace with it. Because if fear becomes your compass, you'll never escape the loop. You'll just keep circling the same hidden corners, deeper and deeper, until you forget who you were. So, we stopped running. We started remembering. We keep journals now, write down every strange detail, every impossible moment. We leave notes at campsites for others, quiet warnings disguised as casual tips. Avoid old stations. If the air changes, turn around. If a billboard shines brighter than the sun, don't look directly at it. And if you hear a payphone ring in the middle of the desert, don't answer, not unless you're ready to forget who you are. People think horror is about monsters. But the scariest thing is watching the world stop making sense and knowing you still have to keep driving, still have to wake up, make coffee, change your oil, tell the DMV your address, while a part of you isn't sure any of this is real. But here's what I've learned out there on the road. The unknown isn't always trying to hurt you. Sometimes it's just watching, testing, seeing how long you'll pretend you don't see it. And when you finally do see it, when you finally look up at that empty road, at that forgotten exit that shouldn't be there, you have a choice. You can floor it, pray it disappears, or you can stop, step out, and ask not what is this, but why me? Because whatever's out there, it already knows your name. It took a long time to make peace with the idea that some questions don't have answers, that some roads don't lead back to safety, that some gas stations aren't meant to serve travelers, they're meant to trap them. But peace, I've learned, isn't silence. It's choosing to live anyway. Mia and I still camp, still drive the desert highways, still pick random dots on the map and point the nose of our old Volkswagen west or north or wherever the road seems to bend unnaturally, like it's trying to hide something. We've accepted that strange things might follow, but we don't flinch anymore. Because the scariest thing that ever happened to me didn't involve ghosts or creatures or curses. It was when I realized I'd stopped trusting my own senses. That moment back near Joshua Tree, when I stood in front of a building I knew wasn't real and still couldn't look away. That was when fear stopped being a reaction and started becoming a part of me. You carry something out of places like that, not a scar, not a mark, but a filter on your eyes. A way of seeing the world that doesn't fade no matter how many sunrises you drive through. It's like looking through tinted glass. You can still see beauty, but there's always a shadow edging in, reminding you what's underneath, what's waiting. But here's the truth nobody tells you. That shadow can teach you things, how to listen better, how to stay still when your instincts scream to move, how to read landscapes like language, and how to know when a place is whispering leave. Mia and I don't tell our story to scare people anymore. We tell it so you'll pay attention to the things that don't quite add up, to the corners of your journey you usually ignore, to the signs that weren't there yesterday. Because if it could happen to us, two rational people in an old van with a couple of maps and an itch for open skies, it can happen to anyone. We didn't go looking for that gas station. It found us because we stayed too long in the space between towns, between night and morning, between who we were and who we'd become if we hadn't left when we did. If we'd walked through that door, if we'd answered the phone. Even now, on quiet nights when the wind dies and the van creaks in its sleep, I think I hear it. The buzz of the overhead lights, the hum of that glowing sign, the impossible sound of a payphone ringing endlessly in the dark. But I don't answer. I close my eyes, I put my hand on the warm metal of the dash, and I remember we made it out. Not because we were stronger, not because we were smarter, but because we listened, because we left, because we chose to remember and not pretend it was a dream. So if you ever find yourself out near Joshua Tree, if the air gets thick and the signs don't make sense, if a lonely road bends just a little too far from logic, Don't keep driving, don't look back, and whatever you do, if you see a station glowing where no station should be, don't stop, because that gas station, it's still out there and it's waiting for the next traveler too tired to question, for the next soul hungry for something stranger than truth, for the next person who says, I think I can handle it. But the desert doesn't care what you think. The desert only remembers what you forget. And once you go far enough in, sometimes it's not the place that's haunted. It's you. I never liked the silence, not really. People say it's peaceful, calming, the kind of quiet you only find deep in the wilderness. But to me, real silence always felt like something was listening. It was late September when I decided to take the trip. I just turned 42, divorced a year prior, no kids, nothing tying me down except a desk job that made me feel like I was slowly fading out of my own life. So I bought the old VW Westphalia, candy apple red, rusted around the edges but solid, and set off with the kind of optimism only someone running from their own reflection can muster. The idea was to hit the lesser-known national parks, not Yosemite, not Yellowstone. I wanted the ones people passed over, Gila cliff dwellings, Lassen volcanic, Isle Royale. I had this growing itch, this hollow in my chest, and I thought if I could just be alone in the middle of nowhere long enough, I'd find whatever it was that I'd lost, or maybe just find myself. I didn't plan to end up in Kings Canyon National Park. I was aiming further north, but there'd been road closures due to fires, and I rerouted. The air was strange as I pulled in, not smoky, but still sharp in my lungs, like metal and pine. It was midweek. The lot was mostly empty, just a dusty white RV near the far end of the campground loop, and an old couple unpacking chairs beneath a canopy of firs. I took a shaded spot near the back, close to the river but far from the communal fire pit. I wasn't looking to make friends. I just wanted to breathe, get a few good hikes in, sleep beneath the stars, let the wilderness sand down the edges of whatever was wrong with me. That first night, something felt off. It wasn't anything dramatic, just little things. The way the wind moved, it didn't rustle the trees, it whispered through them, soft and rhythmic like breathing. There were no bugs, no distant howls, no crackle of raccoons sniffing for scraps, just that same mechanical wind and the low hiss of the river. I was drinking tea outside the van, watching the sky turn from ember to ink when I saw the ranger. He came from the direction of the trailhead, tall, thin, clean uniform, but pale, like hospital room pale. He didn't have a flashlight, didn't seem to need one. He passed by my sight without a word, didn't even look at me, just kept walking, boots silent on gravel. The old couple had gone inside their RV by then, no one else around. I thought maybe I'd imagined him, until I saw his footprints in the dirt the next morning. Large, deep, fresh. I asked the camp host about it when I went to refill water. She was in her 60s, leathery skin, weather-beaten smile, said no ranger had been on duty that night. You probably saw a hiker heading out early, she said, not unkindly. They do that sometimes, sleep in their cars at the trailhead. I wanted to believe her. I tried. But hikers don't walk like that, don't move like shadows, don't glow. Day 2, I decided to hike one of the less used trails, Lewis Creek. It's not a long hike, maybe 7 miles round trip with a few good overlooks. I passed 2 people the whole time, an older guy in a faded fishing hat and a young woman with a huge camera lens who barely acknowledged me. About halfway through, the trail split. One fork went down toward the creek, the other climbed into the trees. No signs, no markers. I took the uphill path, thinking it would loop around. That was the first mistake. The second was ignoring the smell. At first, I thought it was just damp earth, that thick fungal aroma after rain, but it didn't make sense. It hadn't rained in days, and it didn't smell alive. It was acrid, rusty, like rotting metal. I pressed on, slower now, trying to rationalize the unease coiling in my gut. Maybe a dead animal off trail. Maybe the trees were just dense enough to block the sun and give that illusion of darkness. But then I noticed something else. The sound had changed. No birds, no bugs, no water, Just the crunch of my boots and the sudden awareness of how loud I was in that place. Every twig snap echoed like a scream. Every breath felt stolen. I turned back, tried to retrace my steps, but the path had shifted. I swear to you, I'm not a greenhorn. I've hiked most of the Pacific Northwest. I know what a trail looks like. But now, the ground beneath me didn't match what I remembered. No footprints, no landmarks, just endless sloping forest in all directions. That's when I saw it, or rather didn't. My own footprints were gone, not just faded, gone. I stood there, heart thudding, stomach cold, realizing how alone I really was. I yelled, waited, nothing. Just that same empty hush pressing in from all sides. The same mechanical wind, now colder, like it was seeping through me instead of past me. I don't know how long I wandered. An hour? 3? My phone had no signal. The GPS glitched, spinning like a compass at sea. I should have panicked. I should have screamed. But instead, I felt this odd, numb calm. Like something was telling me not to be afraid. Like something wanted me to stay. Eventually, I stumbled back into camp. Not through the trailhead, not even near where I started. Just suddenly, trees parted and there was my van, right where I left it. Except the old couple's RV was gone. Vanished. No tire tracks, no camp chairs, not even the smell of smoke. The white RV on the far end was still there, but it looked wrong. Dirtier. Windows fogged from the inside. And when I squinted at it, I could have sworn someone was standing just behind the glass, unwatching. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat, doors locked, lights off. Every instinct in my body screamed to leave, to drive until I saw pavement and billboards and fast food signs. But I couldn't bring myself to turn the key. Something was keeping me there, not physically, psychologically. It was like the forest had crawled inside me and nested. Around midnight, I heard voices, not close, not far, just somewhere, drifting through the trees. They didn't speak words exactly, more like syllables strung together, repeating, musical but wrong, like a lullaby played backward. I curled tighter in the seat, trying not to breathe too loud, trying not to exist too hard. Then came the knock, 3 times, slow, deliberate, not on the driver's window, on the back of the van, where there were no steps, no ground, just air. I didn't move, not even to blink. I just sat there, clutching the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went bloodless. 3 slow knocks, and then nothing. No footfalls, no voice, no shift of weight. As if whoever or whatever had been back there had simply ceased to exist. I kept waiting for the adrenaline to surge, for my brain to ignite with a kind of primal terror that would finally propel me out of that parking spot. But instead, I felt a numb, almost clinical curiosity, like my fear had been scooped out, replaced by something patient, observing. It took all my strength to turn in my seat and peer through the gap in the curtains. Moonlight traced the outline of the back window, milky and cold. I could just make out the condensation, 3 perfect circles where the knocks had pressed against the glass, as if fingertips colder than the night itself had left their ghostly print behind. My stomach lurched. Finally, something broke free inside me. A thought so loud it felt like it cracked my skull. Leave now. I started the engine. The ignition turned over, cough choked, then caught. I didn't look back. I didn't check the mirrors. I didn't even grab my camp chair. I threw the van into drive and rolled out of the loop as fast as the rutted gravel would allow. The road out of Kings Canyon is narrow and winding, a series of switchbacks that in daylight are picturesque but at midnight feel like a coffin's spiral. I watched the trees crowd the road, arching over me in a dense canopy, the headlights slicing through just far enough to show the curve ahead, and no farther. After 20 minutes, I realized I'd been driving in a circle. I passed the same broken sign, trailhead closed, twice, the same fallen log, the same patch of lupine flowers shivering in my headlights. My hands started to shake on the wheel. No matter which turn I took, no matter how far I pressed the gas, I always ended up back in that same stretch of road. Around the 3rd loop, my headlights flashed across a shape standing by the mile marker. I slammed on the brakes so hard everything in the cabinets clattered forward. My heart was beating in my ears. But when I looked again, there was nothing there, just the blank road, and the black trees. I tried to convince myself it had been a trick of light, my exhausted brain firing off phantoms to match the rising panic. But when I crept past the mile marker, I saw the footprints in the dirt shoulder, long, deliberate strides leading from the trees to the pavement, and then stopping. No return tracks, no drag marks. Just stopping. My throat closed. I forced a breath, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. The smell in the van had changed, gone metallic, sharp, like old coins left too long in a damp place. I could almost taste it on my tongue. It wasn't until then that I realized I'd been clenching my jaw so tight it felt like my teeth would crack. Some part of me, the last rational shard, whispered that I couldn't keep driving in circles, that eventually I'd run out of gas and be stranded here and wherever here really was. I stopped the van in the middle of the road, killed the engine, listened. Nothing. No wind. No animals, no insects, just the deafening, total absence of sound pressing against the windows like a weight. I told myself I had to get out. Maybe walk ahead, see if the road really did loop, or if it only looked that way because of the dark. My fingers fumbled at the door latch. The cold hit me like a slap, so much colder than it had any right to be. It was as if the forest itself was leeching the heat from my skin, claiming it. I stepped onto the cracked asphalt. The gravel crunched softly under my boots. In that moment, I felt like the only living thing left on earth. I walked 20 paces forward. The van's headlights still pointed behind me, throwing my shadow long and thin across the trees. For the first time, I felt exposed. Not watched from a distance, but studied, as though countless eyes were fixed on the shape of me in that cone of cold light. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line. I didn't expect to see anything, so when I did, it nearly buckled my knees. Between two pines stood a man, or something that looked like a man. He was tall, impossibly so. His silhouette stretched almost to the lowest branches. No face, no features, just darkness deeper than the night around it, as though the forest itself had split to let something older step through. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. All I could do was stare. The figure didn't move, didn't sway. It simply existed, an unblinking shape that made my brain throb in protest. My breath started coming shallow, panicked. The cold grew worse, like 1,000 tiny needles piercing my skin. And then it stepped forward, one deliberate stride out of the trees and onto the shoulder. The darkness around it seemed to ripple, to curl and uncurl like smoke in a jar. Something inside me finally broke. I stumbled back to the van, nearly dropping the keys as I fumbled to unlock the door. I didn't look up again. I couldn't. My hands shook so violently I thought I'd never get the key into the ignition. When the engine roared to life, I slammed it into reverse, tires skidding over gravel and dirt. I didn't stop to check if the figure followed. I backed up until the road straightened. Shifted into drive. And then, at last, the road unspooled in front of me as it should have all along. The loop was broken. I drove until the black trees gave way to the first glimmers of dawn, until the smell faded from the air and the cold lifted from my bones, until I could finally breathe without tasting metal. I pulled into a gas station just past the park boundary, the kind of squat cinder block place that smelled of stale coffee and diesel. I sat there in the driver's seat, engine ticking as it cooled, trying to understand what had happened. Had I hallucinated the whole thing? Sleep deprivation? Some chemical leaking from the van's old systems? I thought about the footprints, about the knocks on the window, the cold pressing in, the way the road had held me hostage. I thought about the man, no, the shape, stepping out of the trees. And I knew, deep down, that I hadn't imagined a damn thing. I didn't speak to anyone at that gas station, didn't go in. I just sat there for maybe an hour with the engine off, eyes locked on the horizon like the trees might still come spilling over it, like that thing might have followed me. Eventually, when my heartbeat slowed and the sun climbed higher, I forced myself to get out, filled the tank. My hands still trembled. I couldn't get the scent out of my nose. That metallic tang, half blood, half something older. It clung to the collar of my jacket, Maybe it was just in my memory now. I got back on the highway and kept heading east. Didn't really have a destination anymore. My plan had been to hit 3 or 4 national parks, take my time, live slow. I even had a little journal where I'd written down trail names, scenic byways, old diners to try. All that was shoved into the glove box now like it didn't matter, because it didn't. Somewhere outside Flagstaff, I stopped at a pay-by-night campground wedged behind a truck stop. Nothing special. Mostly long-term RVs with blue tarps over the awnings, a few busted lawn chairs, someone's dog tied to a cinder block. I paid the guy at the desk and parked on the edge, under a flickering streetlight that gave me a weird sense of safety. I kept the doors locked, didn't open the curtains, just sat there in the dark with my hands on my knees. That night, I dreamed of trees folding in on themselves. I dreamed of being back on that loop, driving forever, the road unraveling and rebuilding behind me. I dreamed of those 3 knocks again, this time not on the glass, but on my spine. When I woke up, my fingernails had left crescents in the skin of my palms. I told myself I wouldn't go back into another national park. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But if you've ever traveled long enough in an RV, you know this life has its own gravity. Something about the road, the movement, the constant search for quiet. It gets into you. Makes you curious again, even when you shouldn't be. 2 weeks later, I met Nate and Jenna in a BLM campground outside of Durango. They were in their early 30s, like me, friendly, from Missouri. Nate was a former high school teacher turned digital nomad. Jenna ran a yoga app out of their Sprinter van. Nice folks. Grounded. They'd been doing the circuit longer than I had, and when we got to talking around the fire pit that first night, I didn't mention what happened in Kings Canyon. But they did. It started when Jenna asked, "You ever camp near Mineral King?" I froze. That name hadn't left my head in days, but I'd never said it aloud. I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Yeah. Once." "Why?" She looked at Nate. He shrugged, then poked the fire with a stick. "We tried to last fall, got turned around somewhere near the ridge and ended up, well, I guess you'd call it stuck." I leaned forward. "You looped?" Nate's eyes flicked to mine. There was a long pause before he nodded once. 4 times, same trailhead, same bent sign, same busted pine branch on the right side of the road. Couldn't figure it out. "You see anyone?" I asked. "Not exactly," Jenna said. Her voice dropped, eyes distant. "We heard someone, though, out in the woods, calling our names." I didn't ask how that was possible. They hadn't told anyone where they were going. No one knew they were out there. "Did you leave anything behind?" I asked quietly. Nate looked at me like he knew exactly what I meant. "Just a camp chair," Jenna added, and we heard it dragging behind the van the whole way down the mountain, like something was holding on to it. That was the moment I understood I hadn't imagined anything. This wasn't some one-time freak mental break. There was a pattern, a thread running beneath the map lines we follow when we think we're off the grid. These parks, these wilderness zones, they're not just escape valves for the overworked and overstressed. They're thresholds. Sometimes they let something in. Sometimes they don't let something out. I stayed up most of the night after that conversation, staring at the ceiling of the van, thinking about how many people I'd passed on the road. All those solo campers, couples with roof tents, retirees with bikes strapped to the back of their rigs. How many of them had felt something strange and buried it deep? How many had heard whispers they didn't tell anyone about? And how many hadn't made it back? I started researching, quietly, carefully. Used a VPN, different accounts. I didn't want to show up on the wrong search logs. I searched missing persons in national parks, found dozens of names, hundreds. Some were hikers who slipped off cliffs. Some, they said, wandered into the wild without food or maps. But others just vanished. No scent trail, no sightings, no trace. The common thread? Secluded areas, isolated trailheads, places with histories longer than we know how to read. I started seeing the signs, not supernatural, more subtle. Overcrowded areas that suddenly cleared out. Rangers who wouldn't answer certain questions. Trail closures with no explanation. Locals who knew things but wouldn't speak them aloud. And then I got the message. It came through my camping forum profile, one I rarely checked. The user had no avatar, no post history. Just a message that said, "You're not crazy. They find the loners. Stay out of the gaps between grid squares." That was all. I replied, asked who they were, where they'd been. I never got a response. The profile was deleted an hour later. But the phrase stuck with me. The gaps between grid squares. I pulled out my maps, real ones, the old paper kind. I noticed it then, certain patches of parkland with almost no service roads, regions that seemed untouched even on satellite. I remembered something Nate had said, half drunk by the fire. There are places that don't show up on Google Earth, like the pixels glitch on purpose. I was already too far down the rabbit hole. I had to know more. I don't know if it was obsession or instinct, but I couldn't let it go. That message haunted me. Stay out of the gaps between grid squares. It was like a riddle and a warning and an invitation all in one. I started comparing Park Service maps with satellite overlays, found slivers of land where trails ended abruptly, areas marked wilderness study, where foot access was possible. But the land hadn't been mapped or surveyed in detail since the 1960s. I made a list. 12 spots across the U.S., all in or near national parks, all tucked into those invisible cracks between what's documented and what's believed to be safe. One of them was in Olympic National Park, up near the Quinault Rainforest. I wasn't planning to go there, but plans stopped mattering months ago. I drove north along the coast, through mist and salt air and long, winding roads that smelled like moss and thyme. There's a kind of silence in the Pacific Northwest you don't find anywhere else. It's not empty, it's listening. Everything out there is saturated with memory. And when I turned off Highway 101 and onto a single-lane dirt path toward a trailhead with no name, that silence deepened until it felt like pressure against my ears. I parked at the edge of an old logging road. No one else was there. No ranger station, no cell service, no tire tracks ahead of mine. Just me, the van, and a canopy of green that swallowed the sky. I brought a small pack, compass, water, some trail mix. I wore my GPS on a lanyard, turned it on out of habit, but the moment I stepped into the tree line, the signal blinked out. The trail wasn't really a trail. It was more like the memory of one. Faint boot prints from years ago, a few ribbons of pink survey tape rotting into the bark. I followed it deep into the understory until even the sound of my own breathing felt like an intrusion. And that's when it started again. Not the knocking, not yet. Just the stillness. I stopped by a fallen tree to check my compass. The needle spun. I turned it flat, tapped the glass. It steadied north, then drifted west again like it was being pulled by something buried under the soil. There were no birds, no wind, just a wet, heavy presence hanging over everything. About an hour in, I found the tent. It was collapsed, half covered in ivy. The nylon shredded in places, the poles snapped. I could still make out the brand name, REI. Inside, there was a rolled-up fleece jacket, some moldy trail bars, a headlamp with dead batteries, and a logbook wrapped in a freezer bag. I read it sitting on a stump while the forest leaned in close. The entries were short. A woman named Elise, early 30s. Solo backpacker. Most entries were mundane, trail notes, thoughts on the weather, what she saw, then something shifted. Day 3. Heard something pacing around my tent. Thought it was a deer. Sounded heavier. No prints in the morning. Just broken twigs. Day 4. Dreamt of knocking. Over and over. Woke up sweating. Trees looked different somehow. Day 5. I think something's moving when I blink. Like the forest rearranges itself when I'm not watching. Day 6. Going to hike out early. Can't shake the feeling I'm being watched. Saw a shadow that didn't belong to anything. Don't want to stay another night. No more entries after that. The last page had something scrawled along the bottom in smeared pen. Don't look behind you if you hear your name. It's not who you think. I closed the book and stood up slowly. The forest behind me was utterly still. I don't know what compelled me to speak out loud, but I did. Just 3 words. Elise, you there? Nothing. Then after a few seconds, from deep within the trees, maybe 50 yards out, maybe less, I heard a woman's voice answer, "Over here." I turned without thinking. There was no one. Just a dark hollow between the trunks where the ferns grew tall and undisturbed. The sound hadn't come from any direction. It was all around me, like the trees had spoken her name. I stepped back toward the trail, but it was gone. The ferns had grown thicker. The stump where I'd been sitting, gone. Vanished. I spun in a slow circle, trying not to panic, trying to find some marker I recognized, but the world around me was different, subtly wrong. I walked fast, choosing a direction, hoping for any sign of human presence. 10 minutes, then 20. Still nothing. The air felt heavier now, harder to breathe. My ears rang, and then I heard it. Knock, knock. It wasn't on a door. It wasn't on wood at all. It was inside my head. The same rhythm I'd heard back in California, the same pattern from my dreams, a sound like bone against bone. I ran, no thought, no plan, just instinct. I pushed through branches that clawed at my jacket. I followed the thinnest sliver of light I could see through the trees, even though the sky was already darkening. And then I burst out onto gravel, an old road. Narrow, uneven, but real. I stumbled toward a break in the woods where I saw a shape, silver, boxy, familiar. My van. I don't remember unlocking the door. I just remember slamming it behind me and turning the key with shaking hands, my breath fogging the windshield as the engine roared to life. I drove until I found the main road again, until the trees thinned and the signal bars returned to my phone. I didn't look in the rearview mirror the whole time, not once. Back at a campground near Forks, I unrolled my sleeping bag on the floor of the van and laid there with the light on, staring at the ceiling, heart hammering like it wanted to crack my ribs. That night, I dreamed of Elise. She stood at the edge of my bed, soaked in moss and moonlight. Her eyes were empty sockets, but her lips moved like she was whispering something over and over. I couldn't hear it, but when I woke up, the window next to my head had 3 smudges on the glass, like someone had tapped it. Once, twice, 3 times. I left Washington the next morning. Didn't shower, didn't eat, just drove. I kept to the interstates, kept the windows rolled up even when the van got too warm. Something about what happened out there felt like it was still with me, like I'd walked through something I wasn't meant to see, and now it followed in the quiet. I thought about going home. But where was that now? The map with the red circles stayed folded on the passenger seat beside me. I glanced at it from time to time. Each dot felt less like a destination and more like a wound in the earth, a spot where something old and watching push through the seams of what we call wild. I wasn't chasing a story anymore. I wasn't even looking for closure. I just needed to understand. There was one place I'd been avoiding, a dot near the center of Colorado, deep inside Rocky Mountain National Park. I didn't circle it first. I had barely marked it at all, just a small dash, a hesitation in pen. The story connected to it was thin, hardly more than rumor. A backpacker in 2006 had disappeared with his dog. Search and rescue found the dog wandering back to the trailhead 3 days later, calm, tail wagging, clean, like it had never left camp. The man was never found. No sign of distress. The campsite was untouched. His boots were there, neatly laced and dry by the fire pit. Some say he left willingly. Others say the dog brought something back. I drove into Colorado on a Thursday. The air changed the moment I hit the mountain passes. Thinner, cleaner, but sharper too, like the cold could cut through denim if it wanted. I reached the edge of the park just before dusk and found a primitive campground off a gravel road, surrounded by aspen and blue spruce. No one else was there. Of course not. The site was technically closed for the season, but the gate was open. A paper sign taped to a post read, "Enter at own risk, unmaintained area." I parked the van near a fire ring and sat behind the wheel for a long time before stepping outside. The sun had dropped low behind the ridge, throwing long shadows across the ground like dark fingers stretching out from the trees. The wind blew cold through the canyon, thin, high-pitched, almost like a voice. The trail I wanted wasn't marked. It started behind a thicket of young pines, barely a footpath. I waited until morning to follow it. I brought the journal from California, the one I'd taken from that ranger station, the one with the red handprint on the last page. I kept it in my backpack like a relic. It didn't belong to me, but somehow it felt like an anchor, a reminder that this was real. The trail wound higher through thinning trees and rock ledges. I passed old switchbacks, cairns knocked over by wind or time. A couple hours in, I saw something that stopped me cold. A jacket, bright red, snagged in a bramble. It looked fresh. I stepped off the path to reach it, but when I touched it, it crumbled in my hand. The fabric flaked away like ash. Beneath it was a name tag stitched into the lining, Griffin. That was the last name of the man who vanished here. I remember it now. Farther up the ridge, I found the campsite, a flat, clear spot near a dry creek bed. Fire ring built of large stones, logs around it blackened from past use, and sitting on one of them impossibly upright was a pair of hiking boots, neatly laced, dry, no mold, no moss, as if someone had set them there yesterday. But the laces, they weren't tied like you or I would tie them. They were looped in a strange knot, like a weave of figure eights and coils. I leaned in to examine them. That's when I noticed it. The boots weren't empty. They were filled with dirt, packed to the brim with clean, dry earth. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. The air felt wrong again, too still, too flat. And then came the smell. Not rot, not sulfur, just absence. A sterile, metallic absence that didn't belong in nature, like hospital air, like the memory of being watched. I turned to leave, and I heard footsteps behind me. Not animals, bipedal, deliberate. I didn't turn around. I just ran. Down the trail, feet slipping on gravel, branches whipping at my face. But the footsteps stayed behind me, calm, measured, as if whatever followed didn't need to hurry. At one point, I tripped, face first into the dirt. I lay there, listening. The footsteps stopped, and then I heard breathing. Close. Right next to me, shallow, slow, like it was trying to match my own. I held my breath. Silence. Then a voice, barely audible, a whisper, dry and flat like static. You don't belong here. I jumped to my feet and spun around. No one. But the footprints were there. Not just behind me, but around me. A circle of prints in the dust. Deep, barefoot, toes long, heels narrow, human in shape, but not. I didn't stop running until I saw the van. I didn't look behind me, didn't speak. Just got in and locked the doors, trembling. That night I didn't sleep. I sat upright in the driver's seat with a flashlight in my lap. Around midnight, the fog rolled in thick and low, blanketing the forest in pale gray. And that's when I heard the dog. It barked once, far off, then closer, then just outside the van. I held my breath. The bark came again, but this time it didn't sound quite right. Too deep, too wet, like someone trying to remember how a dog should sound. I reached slowly for the keys, and just before I turned the ignition, I saw something pass behind the fogged glass. A shadow, 4 legs, then 2, then none, and then just a tapping, faint, on the rear window. 3 slow taps and a whisper. You left the boots behind. I drove until morning. Didn't stop, didn't eat, barely blinked. My hands were locked so tight to the wheel they cramped in strange, clawed positions. It was as if my body was still trying to hold something back, even after I'd left that place behind. When I finally pulled into a gas station outside Estes Park, I barely recognized myself in the bathroom mirror. Mud on my neck. A smear of blood across my cheek from some unseen branch or rock. But what scared me wasn't the cuts. It was the dirt caked under my nails, pressed deep into my scalp, and in my shoes, neatly packed like someone had filled them while I slept. I threw the shoes in the trash, bought a new pair of trail runners at the gear shop next door, something bright and modern like they might outrun the past. They wouldn't. I tried to act normal for a while, camped in safe, full parks, KOAs with picnic tables and laundry machines, friendly hosts who offered marshmallows and ghost stories meant for kids. But it was already too late for that. Something had changed in me. I wasn't just seeing the weird anymore. I was inviting it. Not on purpose, not directly, but something about how I looked at the world now seemed to attract the cracks in it. The next red circle on the map was in New Mexico, just outside Los Alamos. There was a canyon there, steep and dry, filled with crumbling rock walls and twisted juniper. The story came from a couple who disappeared while hiking in 1983. Their gear was found stacked neatly at the edge of a cliff. Tents, boots, a Polaroid camera, all untouched. No sign of the couple. The photo left in the camera was even stranger. It showed an empty trail, taken at ground level, as if someone had laid the camera down on the dirt and walked away. But behind the brush line, barely visible, there were figures. Dozens, all watching. No faces, just the shapes of heads. I parked at a public trailhead and hiked out toward the marked coordinates. The sun beat down hard, dry, and relentless, the kind of heat that seemed to press from all directions. No birds, no wind, just the steady crunch of my feet on gravel. About a mile in, I reached the bluff, and there it was. A patch of land cleared of vegetation, rocks arranged in an odd spiral. In the center, a small cairn, maybe a foot tall, perfectly balanced. I walked a slow circle around it. Something about the arrangement felt too intentional, like it wasn't for marking a grave, but for calling something back. As I passed the far side of the spiral, my foot caught on something. I bent down and saw it, a Polaroid, not faded, not old, just sitting in the dirt like it had been dropped yesterday. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It showed a man, mid-40s, lean, stubble on his chin, standing where I stood, same angle, same time of day, and behind him in the background there was movement, a shape, blurred, too tall. I flipped the photo over. On the back in neat handwriting, "If you see this, you're already in it." I didn't hear the sound right away. It wasn't loud, just a hum, low, mechanical, like a motor idling somewhere far underground. And then came the vibration, through my feet, through my bones. The ground itself trembled, not a quake, but something deeper, like the air under the earth was shifting. I turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning the canyon, and that's when I noticed them. Carvings, hundreds, maybe thousands, etched into the walls of the bluff. Not words, not symbols I recognized, just spirals, interlocking, layered deep into the rock. Fresh, clean. They hadn't been there on the way in. I backed away slowly, and then I saw a figure at the top of the ridge. Still. Too still. No wind, no movement. It didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there watching. I blinked, and it was closer, not by steps, not by motion, just closer, like a skipped frame in a film reel. I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't follow the trail. I scrambled over dry washes and boulders, cutting my legs, tearing my arms. I kept my eyes down, afraid to see where it might be next. When I reached the van, I locked the doors and peeled out of the lot, tires spinning on loose dust. It followed me home. Not the figure. Not the place, but the feeling. That sense that the watching never stopped. Even when I closed the curtains, even when I drowned the silence with music, with noise, with light, the quiet always returned. And in the quiet, the whisper. Not words, just presence. I kept driving after that. No plan, no map, just a fading sense of direction. Some nights I parked deep in BLM land and waited to feel safe again. It never came. One night in Utah, I awoke to the sound of someone walking around my van. Not fast, not cautious, just there, making sure I heard, I didn't move, didn't breathe. I listened as they circled twice, then silence. A full minute passed. Then, ever so lightly, a single word scratched into the condensation on the rear window. Soon. By the time I reached Glacier National Park, I was barely sleeping at all. I lived on gas station food, caffeine pills, and the throb of dread behind my eyes. The park was quiet in late fall, snow creeping down the ridges, most campgrounds shut for the season. I found an open lot near Two Medicine Lake and parked under a canopy of pine. The water was glass still. Mountains reflected like teeth in a mirror. That night I tried something new. I didn't close the curtains. I left the windows bare, the doors unlocked. Let whatever was following me know it was welcome. No tricks, no fear, just surrender. And you know what? It didn't come. Not then, not in that form. But around 3 a.m. I heard a knock. Not at the door, but inside the van, like a tap from within the cabinet beneath the sink. Then another, from the storage hatch under the bed, and then the whisper again, closer now, clearer. It said my name, my real name, one I hadn't told anyone on this trip. I sat up slowly. The air was ice. My breath fogged in front of me, and there, just inches from the glass, was my reflection. But it didn't move when I did. It blinked when I didn't, and its mouth was moving. I leaned in, and I swear to you, it mouthed the same word I saw written in the window back in Utah. Soon. I left Glacier before dawn, didn't pack, didn't check the weather, just shoved everything into the van and drove like my life depended on putting miles between me and whatever that was. But distance meant less and less now. The roads blurred together. Montana, Idaho, Oregon. Each new place offered a temporary illusion of safety, a trick of the map. I'd stop at a gas station, stare at myself in the bathroom mirror, and see someone who looked like me but wasn't really there. A shadow walking around inside my body. And in the corners of those rest stops, always the same bulletin boards, missing hikers, disappeared couples, a last seen photo, a timeline, a list of what they were wearing. What they never showed was what they left behind, like the half-buried tent I found in Olympic National Park. It was raining that day, right? Soft and misty, one of those coastal rains that makes the trees feel like they're breathing around you. I parked in a semi-legal pull-off and followed a side trail toward a place I'd marked weeks ago. Someone had posted about it on an obscure hiking forum. No GPS coordinates. Just a photo and a phrase. You'll hear the flute before you see the clearing. I thought maybe it was metaphorical. It wasn't. 2 miles in, just past a fork in the trail, I heard it. Thin and distant, like something played through a long pipe. Not quite music. Not quite wind. It pulled at me. I followed it, stepping off trail, deeper into the ferns and old growth. Everything felt muffled, like sound was being swallowed whole. My breath, my steps, even the rain, and then there it was. The clearing. Not large, maybe 20 feet across. Perfectly round, as if something had carved a hole into the forest. The trees at the edge were scorched black halfway up, like they'd been kissed by lightning, but only partway. The rest stood tall and green above the line. In the middle, a tent, collapsed, ripped open at the seam, still staked into the ground, but sunken slightly, like it had been there for years. I stepped closer, cautious. Inside the tent were bones, not full skeletons, pieces. A jaw, a femur, a child's shoe, and beside it, a notebook, half-soaked, clutched in a torn backpack. I opened it. The pages were warped and stuck, but I could make out some entries. Scratched in pencil, erratic, frantic. We hear footsteps at night, never during the day. The trees bend toward them. It's not wind, it pretends to be, but wind doesn't ask questions. I saw something wearing Josh's face, but Josh was asleep. I checked. I stopped flipping. The last page was just a single word, look. And beneath it, smudged into the paper like a greasy fingerprint, something had drawn an eye, not a human one. It had no pupil, just spirals. I dropped the notebook and ran. The flute music followed me the whole way back. Not behind me, above me, as if something long and thin and weightless was gliding just above the canopy. It didn't stop until I reached the van. And then silence, not peace, just the kind of silence that waits for you to blink. After that, I started recording myself at night, set my phone to capture audio as I slept. At first, it was just breathing. Then, one night, I caught something else. At 2:37 a.m., the van door creaked, not slammed, not opened, just shifted, like someone had pushed on it gently from the outside. Then the faint sound of someone whispering, a voice not my own. It said slowly, carefully, "He's almost ready." When I played the audio the next morning, I sat frozen for nearly an hour, not just because of what it said, but because it sounded so close. Not outside, inside, like someone was sitting right at the foot of the bed. I tried going home after that, tried to make it all stop, but I didn't have a home anymore. My old apartment had been rented out, my storage unit payment had lapsed, I'd vanished. Same as the people I'd been chasing. And when I stayed in a motel that night in Reno, I found a newspaper slipped under the door the next morning. It wasn't local. It was from Montana. The front page, solo van camper missing near 2 Medicine. The photo showed the van, my van, but it was parked crooked, Windows shattered. The license plate was the same, but something was off. The sticker was wrong, a year, and the photo, it wasn't recent. It was snowing in the picture, but there hadn't been snow in Glacier yet. I checked the date on the paper. No date, no barcode, no publisher, just blank white on the back. I went to the front desk, shaking. They hadn't delivered any newspapers. No one had. That was when I understood. I was already inside it. Not just the parks, not just the woods, something deeper. Whatever this is, it doesn't need the forest to find you. It becomes wherever you are, and it waits until you believe in it. I'd given it everything. Attention, fear, curiosity, my voice. I was narrating my own unraveling, and it was listening. Somewhere along the way, the story stopped being about the people who disappeared and started being about the one who wouldn't. Because I keep going. I keep driving. Each stop, each strange encounter, each whisper from the trees or knock under the bed, they aren't trying to scare me anymore. They're trying to teach me how to belong here, how to vanish the right way, how to leave behind a story that calls others in. Because I've started to hear the final step. The last thing people hear before they disappear. It's not screaming. It's not a chase. It's just one word whispered from the trees, the lake, the soil under your wheels. Stay. I didn't mean to go back to Yosemite. I told myself I was just passing through, following the Sierra Nevadas down toward lower elevation, trying to stay ahead of a snow front. But the truth is, I could have taken a dozen other routes. My gut had been screaming at me not to return. Every part of my body tensed as the familiar peaks came into view, half veiled in haze. Still I drove in. Still I stopped. Still I parked the van in a pull-off I'd sworn never to see again. This was where it started for me, before the journals, before the flute, before I knew what was happening. Just a late summer night, years ago, watching the fireflies dance outside a tent window, whispering to myself that the world was good. But this time, there were no fireflies. There was no music, just stillness, and a silence so complete I could feel it press against my chest. I stood outside the van, just listening. And that's when I heard it, a soft rustle behind me, no animal, no breeze. I turned slowly. It was me, standing at the tree line, same jacket, same boots, same eyes, but not the same. This version of me looked empty, like a costume propped up by memory, like something wearing my skin the way a tree wears old bark. I didn't move, neither did it. And then it spoke, not out loud, but in my head, like it had always been there. You came back, just like we knew you would. I opened my mouth, but no words came. I wasn't afraid. That scared me more than anything, because fear is human. Fear reminds you you're still alive. But this was surrender. The version of me tilted its head. Do you understand it now? It asked. Understand what? I thought. No sound escaped my throat. It didn't answer with words. It stepped aside, and behind it the forest opened, but not like before. Not a trail, not a path. It opened like a mouth, wide, black, waiting. And from within that impossible opening came every sound I'd heard over the past year. The screams, the flute, the soft voice saying he's almost ready. The knock on the van door, the sobbing woman from Zion, the journal whispering, look. They all echoed together like a choir built from memory. I backed up, shaking, but my boots wouldn't move. I looked down. Roots had grown over them, thin ones like vines, sprouted in minutes from the soil beneath me, wrapped tight like loving fingers. I screamed. It didn't help. The other me smiled, not cruelly, almost sadly, like it knew I wasn't ready, like it hoped I would be. Then the sky turned. Not dark, not exactly. It flipped. I can't explain it any other way. One second the clouds were above me, and the next they were beneath me, and I was falling but not moving, and the forest was laughing, not in sound but in shape. The trees bent toward me and whispered, stay. I woke up hours later in the van, engine off, keys on the seat, boots soaked, roots gone, but the forest didn't look the same anymore. It didn't feel like something outside me. It felt like home. And that scared me worse than anything else, because I've driven thousands of miles trying to stay ahead of this thing, this presence, this sickness, this curse. But I think it's been inside me from the beginning, like it wasn't following me. I was following it. A week later, I drove south into Arizona. The air was dry, thin. The desert stretched wide and clean, no forest to hide in, no shadows to creep from. I parked at a Bureau of Land Management site, open ground. No trees, no tricks, just stars. I sat on the roof of the van with a beer and stared up, waiting to feel normal again. And that's when I saw them. At the edge of the desert, just where the ground rises into low red cliffs, a line of people, standing shoulder to shoulder, not moving, not walking, just waiting. Their faces were wrong, not grotesque, just blank, like they'd forgotten how to be human. One of them raised a hand and pointed at me. I slid off the roof, heart pounding, dropped the beer, keys already in hand. But when I looked back, there was nothing there. No line, no people, no cliffs, just open land and silence. But this time the silence was inside me too. A hollow, an echo chamber, because the longer I ran, the more I realized I wasn't escaping. I was preparing to become the next missing poster someone reads while sipping coffee thinking, that'll never be me. So why am I telling you this? Why share any of it? Because I want you to understand something. The danger isn't just in the parks. It's in what the parks hold, what they remember. Every laugh, every scream, every footstep left behind in the mud, they don't forget. And the forest, the real forest, the one behind the trees, it feeds on what we leave. Sometimes it eats people whole. Sometimes it lets them come back. Changed, hollow, wearing their old smiles like borrowed clothes. So if you're reading this or hearing it or sitting by a fire right now thinking about packing up and heading west, just promise me one thing. Don't go looking for the stories. Don't follow the trail of disappearances, because if you do, it might start following you. And one day, you'll hear the wind whisper your name in the wrong voice, and you'll see yourself at the edge of the clearing, smiling back. And the only thing you'll feel is familiarity, like coming home. I don't know how much longer I have before it finishes what it started. Maybe I've already disappeared. Maybe this voice you're hearing is just an echo, just part of the forest now, repeating its warnings to whoever will listen. Or maybe you're next, because I've seen how it chooses. It doesn't care if you're brave or smart or careful. It only cares that you're curious. And once it knows your name, it never lets go. So wherever you camp next, when the trees bend just slightly wrong, when the night doesn't smell quite the way it should, when the quiet starts feeling like it's waiting for you to say something, don't. Just pack your things and leave before the forest remembers you. Because the worst kind of disappearance is the one where nobody realizes you're already gone.